Before I got hit, I remember having this like brilliant flashing light. The car came across me and it hit head on. I get up, and first thing I'm thinking is like, am I still alive? And out of nowhere, this man and this woman just show up. And they're like, Brian, you're gonna be okay. And all of a sudden I blinked my eyes, I was on the other side of the fence and they were gone.
Whoa.
Every so often throughout history, something occurs that fundamentally re-architects the reality of human consciousness.
Come back from the meditation, a passage will just fall into my brain. You just get a download.
It's possible when Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, he sucked this data in from this universal field because of these antennas of consciousness.
Our senses are like reducing reality to a wavelength that we can interpret.
3 things you never discuss around the dinner table is money, politics, and religion. Bitcoin involves all 3 of those.
Right.
Another rabbit hole to go down is the Malaysian airline disappearance. Footage that was released that shows 3 devices came up in the air, started spinning, and then there was this bright flash in the sky and it just disappeared out of thin air. The US government has technology and propulsion systems around being able to create a black hole.
We have Bitcoin derangement syndrome, like these people that really don't like Bitcoin. There's some threshold at which our belief structures become like our identity structures.
What if one of the reasons we're so deep-rooted in these views is because most people don't want to admit they're being controlled and there's nothing they can do about it?
We're going to have a conversation today that goes a lot of different places. But let's start with this car accident you were in 2010, which apparently put you on a brand new direction in life at the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So back in 2010 timeframe, I was in college and I went to Mizzou for college. So I was in Columbia, Missouri. I'm originally from Missouri. And I'm driving down this street and I get hit head on by a car kind of like on this country road. And before I got hit, I remember having this like brilliant flashing light that kind of hit me in my eyes before I got hit. And the car came across me and it hit head on. I ended up going around that car and I went down this hill, through a fence, into water, into the windshield, like through the windshield. And so I get up, and first thing I'm thinking is like, am I alive, right? Like grabbing myself, making sure my bones aren't broken. And I do remember in the moment, which is interesting, I was like, God. It's the first thing I could think, like, am I still alive? Because I was so out of it. Then I kind of got up, dusted myself off, got the water off me, walked out of the creek that the car had landed in. And I walked up to this fence. And I was like, actually, the way I walked up to it, I was down a lot further from, I think, where the car went through it. And so I'm looking at this fence and I'm pretty out of it. And I'm thinking, like, how am I going to get over this like 10, 15 foot tall fence? Then out of nowhere, this man and this woman just show up. And I remember specifically what the woman looked like, what the man looked like. They were probably in their mid to late 30s. And they just miraculously showed up out of nowhere. And they're like, Brian, you're going to be okay. We're going to get you through this. Everything's going to be fine. And all of a sudden I blinked my eyes. I was on the other side of the fence and they were gone. And then I look up to my right and there was the ambulance that was starting to show up from the other car that was involved in the accident. And I remember the EMTs coming down, starting to check me, and they brought me up and they were asking me a bunch of questions and then doing my vitals and running diagnosis on me. And then my parents showed up and they had picked me up and they're like, we're going to bring him back to the hospital in St. Louis and get a run up on him to make sure he's okay. And I remember in the drive back to the hospital, my mom was like, Brian, did you drink today? Did you take anything? And I was like, no, I hadn't. I was, hadn't done anything. And I was like, but why? And she was like, because you were talking to the EMTs and you were saying some stuff that was really, really strange that didn't make any sense. And it seems like you had maybe been on drugs or drinking or something. I was like, no, not at all. And I was like, well, what did I say? Because I don't remember having this conversation with the EMTs. And she goes, well, you told them that there was a man and woman and you basically explained exactly what they look like. You gave them an age reference and said that they flew down from the stars and they helped you through the fence and then they disappeared and flew back up into the stars.
Whoa.
And I had no recollection of having that conversation with the EMTs that were doing their analysis on me. And I was like, but I do remember it happening, right? And I was like, yeah, but I didn't remember having the conversation with the EMT. And so that was kind of very unique, right? Like that was my first, I don't know if you would call that a near-death experience. I don't know what you would call that exactly, but something from beyond the earthly plane that came down and touched a situation in my life that fundamentally redirected me. Because at that point in time, I actually left where I was at in college. I went and finished back up college in St. Louis, and that set me on a path to then go to law school, which was very important in my story as well. But it was this fundamental shift that happened for me. And ever since that's occurred, I really had this kind of new look on life that's like, okay, I've got some more time. There's a reason why I'm here.
Wow.
I don't know what it is specifically, but as time plays out, I'll understand it and I'll learn that. But I kind of had this new lease on life where it's like I'm here for a reason, and because I very easily, that could have been my time,
right?
Just like that, right?
Wow.
And so that's kind of what played out there.
Wow. So what do you like when you reflect on that now? Do you think who are these people? Is this guardian angels? Is this a figment of your imagination? Like you said, also you were on one side of the fence and they said they were going to help you, and then all of a sudden you're on the other side of the fence, right?
Yeah.
So
and then they just disappeared. So my recollection.
Is there any I guess, physical explanation for how you got onto the other side of that fence?
I mean, there was no hole in it or anything like that. So I can't really explain what occurred because I don't know.
Yeah.
But it could be guardian angels. I mean, that there's a term for that in a lot of different religions.
Yeah.
Somebody that I don't think was from this earthly plane came to assist me in this point of need and help me. And then kind of led me up to where I needed to go next. But it was pretty profound. It was very impactful on my life. And ever since then, every morning when I wake up, I really think about it, and it's like, okay, I've got some time. Let's see what we can do with it today. And to the best of my ability, let's figure out how we can add some value.
You must be so grateful too. Like that's the hell of an experience. And was the other driver injured?
No, neither of us were injured. So surprisingly, if you would have seen our cars, you would have been like, how did this person get up and walk away from this accident?
Wow.
But the other driver wasn't injured. I had a small scar on my back from the glass cutting me through the windshield.
Yeah.
But besides that, no broken bones, thank God, no serious issues, anything like that. Took me a couple days to kind of come to and bounce back to reality because I'm sure I was pretty concussed, right? Like it was a very bad accident, but no serious injuries. Thank the Lord.
And then coming out of that, like what was your mentality? Like were you, I mean, I'm sure you got a new, like you said, new lease on life, probably a new zest for life. Like what did you feel?
One of the things I felt was more like, I've always had this inner knowing, this intuitive feeling that everything is connected in the world. And that spans beyond somebody's religious or spiritual beliefs. I believe it's like every single thing that happens is somehow connected.
Yeah.
And so there was a reason for this happening. And I always take the look, it's very challenging to connect the dots forward in life. But then after a sequence of events happens, it's very easy to connect them back and say, oh, now I know why this happened was because this needed to happen and then that needed to happen, right? And so looking back in time, even though it was a pretty astral thing that occurred to me and like what would seem like a miraculous situation, it all makes sense because it redirected me on a life path that then allowed me to take these other quantum leaps in life and these miracle situations to happen to me over time.
Yeah, what's the old saying that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards?
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it.
Well, so then this changed your path in life because you then went to law school. Whereas you were not going to law school before?
Yeah, before I was just floating kind of by in college. I wasn't super focused. I was kind of partying a lot at the time. And then this kind of redirected me and made me buckle down to really have some more intention about what I was doing. And when that occurred, I ended up going to law school, went through that process. And then as I was finishing up law school, I actually learned about Bitcoin in 2012. And I was in a wills, trust, and estates class. It's kind of a funny story. So I was in a wills, trust, and estates class, very boring, dry content. The article that I was reading in class, because I wasn't paying attention to what they were talking about, was this new pharmaceutical drug that they were giving to F-15 fighter pilots to allow them to fly very long extended missions with no food or drinks. So it was probably like turbocharged Adderall or something like that, right? And so in the comment section of the article, somebody writes, "Where do I buy this stuff at?" And the next comment says, "You got to send Bitcoin to the manufacturer in Mumbai." And then the next comment is, "What's Bitcoin?" And the next one says, "Read this." And it was the white paper.
Wow.
And so I'm like, this is interesting. So I click it and I read the white paper while I'm sitting in class. And I was like, this is really interesting. And I had no technology background.
Amazing.
Like my undergraduate was English and sociology, and then I was in law school. So I was always interested in technology, but I wasn't a computer scientist. I didn't understand it from a tech standpoint. And so I read it and I was like, this is very fascinating. And I went home that night, I read it again, and I read it the next day. And for some reason, I got so interested in it. And over the course of like a week or two, I probably read that white paper like 30 times.
Wow.
And then I went down the Reddit rabbit hole and the YouTube rabbit hole. And this is when there's Bitcoin only. Nothing else had been created yet.
There wasn't much content back then.
No. So it was like a very small number of people like Andreas Antonopoulos and some very early people that understood it. And so I had this light bulb moment after about 3 months of really this intensive study and research on it, where I thought very much from a philosophical standpoint. I was like, if this works, we're creating an avenue whereby money and state is going to get separated, just like church and state was separated many, many years ago. Yeah. And to a lot of people, they would think that's incredibly hard. Like, how would that ever happen? It's impossible, right? Like the government and the central banks are always going to have control on money. Well, maybe they've always had control on money because there hasn't been a system that enabled the people to siphon off a parallel reality that would actually work. Yeah. And when I discovered that and I really had the light bulb moment with it, for me, that was like the big game changer. So at that time, I became very involved in the space, started learning as much as I could, building relationships, allocating to the space, and kind of building that up over time.
Amazing. That's a good, obviously very early, so good time to get involved with Bitcoin then. And then, so you were one of those few people then that basically read the white paper and you were instantly orange-pilled.
So I wouldn't say I was instantly orange pill because it took me some time to understand it. But after reading it 20 or 30 times, something clicked.
You kept going back to it though. What kept you going back to it?
I think it was just the concept of, if you have a technology that allows you to create a parallel system from something that has so many flaws in it, and I thought about it from a war perspective as well. Yeah. If you think about the central banking system, it really allows the ability on a fiat standard to fund perpetual wars, right? And if you want to have something that can preclude that from occurring, you need a hard money standard where you can't just print money out of thin air. Yeah. And so from that perspective, I thought it was really interesting. And I remember when I was younger, my brother showed me a documentary called Zeitgeist. And Zeitgeist had these 3 segments to it. One was about astrological significance of religious events. The middle section was about 9/11. And the last section was about the monetary system. Yes. And that particular section of the film always stood out to me as like, oh, wow, this is so corrupt. Yeah. And so from a young age, I was very fascinated by the corruption, what a lot of people would call conspiracy theories. I call them conspiracy facts. And as that played out over time, I started reading more books and developing more knowledge on it. And then Bitcoin to me was like a solution to this issue. And if it could work, it's something I wanted to dedicate my life to.
Wow. Okay. So you saw Zeitgeist before the white paper?
Yes. Many years before. Yeah.
That somewhat parallels my experience. Well, I read The Creature from Jekyll Island many years before Bitcoin. I don't think... So I read The Creature from Jekyll Island when I was like 20. I didn't discover Bitcoin until 28, 29 years old. So similar to you, it's like I saw the problem, which I assume you saw the problem with Zeitgeist. Like, oh, this central banking thing is really bad. But in the white paper, he does present Bitcoin as the solution to that to some extent, right? So you were connecting the dots immediately.
Yeah, mine was more philosophical to the standpoint of, if this works, we're fundamentally re-architecting the reality of what our future looks like.
Yes.
And I've always been big into philosophy, big into like these interesting big ideas from philosophers and how that could integrate with our current reality. And so that's the standpoint that it really clicked for me. The technology stuff I learned way later.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is where I think it's really important. Like it's difficult to educate people about Bitcoin by approaching them with technical facts about Bitcoin. This is my frustration actually. And when I got into the space is a lot of the content was technically specific, but not giving you like the larger economic context about the problem it was solving. Later stuff like, Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, you mentioned Andreas, they did a great job of highlighting the context, the problem, but it's hard for people to understand a solution when they don't first understand the problem. And so that's part of the reason even this show is called What is Money? It's like trying to invite people into understanding the problem, basically.
And most people have no idea how our monetary system works.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's one of the really interesting things about Bitcoin is it's created a whole new demographic of people to actually learn and care about our monetary system that never existed before. And I forget who said this quote, but there was a quote many years ago that said, if a nation really understood what its monetary system did, there'd be a revolution by tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I think Henry Ford, I
believe, said that, But it's so fascinating to see this whole new generation of people that care about this because it's important.
Yes.
And we've been intentionally blinded and suppressed this information for many years. And it's time to change that,
Yeah, amen to that. Okay, so you go to law school, or you're in law school. What is your twin flame journey enter the picture? Is this during law school?
Yeah, so I actually met my wife in my first year of law school.
Okay.
And we met, like, instantly clicked and connected. So never had ever met anybody where I just instantly met and was like, oh, wow, I've known this person for thousands of years.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not in this incarnation, but definitely in some past ones, if you believe in that. And we met and we had like an amazing relationship for the 1 year that we were together. So I was in Michigan at the time as a law school, and I transferred back to St. Louis to finish up. And we met there. So when we left, we ended up breaking up because we went to do the long distance thing. And then years later, we reconnected. But through that time period when we were broken up, we would have the craziest synchronicities about each other. So like, as an example, my wife's family was in real estate, and they were actually from Pennsylvania, but they were down in Miami at one time looking at some real estate opportunities. And the real estate's agent that they met that was showing him around, name was Brian Dixon.
Wow.
And like, she'd be thinking about me, and like that would happen. Another crazy situation is one night I got a missed call from her, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. And I didn't see it till the next morning. And I wake up and I was like, hey, is everything okay? Because we hadn't talked for like 6 months at this point. I'm like, is everything okay? And she's like, yeah, I had the craziest dream about you last night. And you were standing outside of this restaurant we used to go to at law school, and you were holding a baby boy in your arms. And I was getting goosebumps because I was literally driving while I'm talking to her, because my first nephew was just born.
Wow.
And so it's like this level of like crazy synchronicities that happened for both of us for many, many, many years. And then we kind of reached this point where she was living in Pennsylvania, I was living in St. Louis, and we're like, look, there's a reason all this stuff is happening. Do you want to come together and let's see what we can make happen? And she ended up agreeing, and she came to St. Louis, and then we've been together ever since.
That's amazing.
But it was remarkable. We had these remarkable, like, what I'd call them twin flame synchronicities that kind of pulled us back together. And I can just tell that we've been together much longer than the time we've spent in this life.
Yeah. Wow. So you got to listen to those signals, right?
Yeah, exactly. Got to be aware of them, and then just kind of let them guide you over time.
Yes. That's awesome. Okay. And then, so what was your path after law school then? Like, you were already into Bitcoin. You were, so wait, when did you get married? This is after law school?
So that was way later. So this was right after law school. This is a funny story. So I finished law school and realized very quickly I didn't want to practice law. I liked law school because it trained me to think in a very, very different way.
Sure.
You kind of look at situations, you analyze both sides of an argument, and then you decide what you want to do. And a lot of people take an emotional stance on an argument. So law school trained me to think in a different way where I was much more objective. So I really enjoyed that component, but the practicing of law was not for me. I didn't enjoy it. And the law firms I worked at, I was very fortunate because the people I worked with always allowed me to do like the entrepreneurial forms of a law firm, meaning like business development, marketing, sales, operations. So I got to learn how you grow a business. And that was always much more interesting to me than the actual practice of law itself. And so when I learned that pretty quick, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go all in on trying to figure out how I can do something more entrepreneurially. And that weekend, when I made that decision, I was watching Netflix, and there was this documentary that popped up called Something Ventured. And what the documentary was about the godfathers that basically started venture capital many, many years ago. So like the Kleiner Perkins of the world, the Sequoias. And in the movie, there was a guy getting interviewed named Don Valentine. Don Valentine's the founder of Sequoia. And I was like, wow, this guy is really fascinating. He was an entrepreneur. He's invested in all these companies that have been massively successful. I was like, I wonder if I can find this guy and get a hold of him. So I started doing some research online, and he was an adjunct professor at Stanford. Where he would just teach about entrepreneurship. So I found his Stanford email address and just shot him a cold email and was like, hey, Don, my name's Brian, just finished law school. This is what I'm interested in. I would love to get some mentorship from you. If you're open to it, please reach out.
Wow.
Never expecting this guy to follow up. You know, multi-billionaire, busy guy. A week and a half later, I'm actually looking at opportunities online for what I want to do with my next step. And I get a random phone call from Silicon Valley. And it's Don Valentine on the phone. He's like, is this Brian? And I was like, yeah. He's like, hey, it's Don Valentine. I was like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? You know? And so he talked to me for about an hour, gave me some awesome advice. And he said, if you ever want to work in venture capital long-term, he goes, we never hire people fresh out of school. We never hire attorneys fresh out of school. We never hire MBA students, anybody like that. We will only hire people if you started a company yourself or you got in early with a startup. you helped grow that business over time because you had the operational expertise to advise the companies that we invest in. He goes, those are the candidates that we look for. He goes, even if your company wasn't successful, at least you have the operational experience of growing it, right? Yeah. And then he was telling me about like him investing in these early companies like Oracle and Apple. And funny, he goes, Brian, this one company came to us and they were selling shoes online in the early days of the internet. And it's like, yeah, it was really interesting. Like, you know, they were generating some revenue. They were doing really good. So we wrote him a check. He goes, later, Brian, that made us $1 billion with a B, Brian, $1 billion. And he goes, and the company was Zappos. And so, you know, really charismatic, funny guy, but gave me really good advice that basically was like, if you want to do this long-term, go start a company or get in early with the company and grow it and get that experience. And that was like remarkable advice for me because that really made my intuition go up and say, okay, what am I going to do next? Let's see where the next door opens. So I started to discover in downtown St. Louis, there was this incubator that was being developed with these startup companies. And St. Louis is not known as a startup community in the early days. And now that's changed a lot. And so I went down to the incubator one day and just started knocking on people's doors to learn what they were building. And it was a bunch of tech startups. And I came across this company called Capital Innovators. And the company was an investment firm that did early stage venture investments. The company itself was a startup. And they also had this group of what we called lead mentors that would like entrepreneurs in residence. So they would sit and advise the businesses that the company would invest in. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh, wow, like this is a venture firm because I'm interested in that. They're a startup. They're funding startups. They have smart entrepreneurs that have been successful advising the startups. If I can put myself in this universe, I could learn a ton over probably a pretty short period of time. And so I talked with her and I was like, can I work for you for free? And she's like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, I just want to learn. Like, this is very fascinating to me. And she's like, yeah, for sure. So I worked for her for free for like 4 weeks. And then after that, it turned into a thing where, you know, I was able to join full time and then built that up and partnered up with her over time as what we built. And the business model was we funded 6 to 7 startups 2 to 3 times a year that had their minimum viable product done. Then we'd bring them to St. Louis. We'd run them through a 12-week, what's called an accelerator program. And at the time, accelerator programs weren't well known. This is a huge phenomenon around the world now, but we were probably one of the very first early accelerator programs. And over time, that turned into larger venture funds, and we provide follow-on funding to the startups. So through that, I funded about 100 startup companies across technology, consumer products. We identified our business model was good at sourcing new technologies. So we had public companies that would hire us to run accelerators on their behalf. So I did it with an energy company. I bid on a government contract with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or the NGA for short. We did accelerator programs for them. The NGA is basically the arbiter in the United States for satellite imagery and geospatial intelligence. So if you're printing out satellite imagery, it's got to go through them. And they're going to have to get their sign of approval on it for national security reasons. And so we were basically sourcing technologies for them on that. And then after building this up over several years and funding these companies, I went to her and I was like, hey, we got to launch a Bitcoin fund or a digital asset fund. This was probably like 2016 timeframe, I want to say. And at the time, she was kind of at a later portion of her career and didn't want to do it and kind of didn't understand the technology at that point, I think. And so I was like, I get it, but I'm going to go do it. And so I ended up coming across my partner today, Brian Estes, who's the chief investment officer of Off the Chain Capital, the business that we run together today. And we joined forces and grew that business over time. And it's been remarkable. So now kind of it went full circle. Well, now I get to spend all my time in the digital asset space. And with what we do is we kind of take a traditional Warren Buffett investment approach and we apply it to this new technology sector.
Yeah, that's so cool. So then when you were working in the startup universe, I guess you were a little bit outside of the Bitcoin crypto universe, obviously, just focusing on traditional startups.
Well, how we actually, Brian Estes and I met the first time, funny enough, is we had both made a venture investment in the same blockchain startup many years ago in St. Louis. And that's how we first met the first time. And then we reconnected years later. So yeah, we weren't making a ton of investments in Bitcoin related startups or blockchain related startups, but we had a few. And but I was doing the Bitcoin and crypto stuff on the side. Actually, my wife and I launched a consulting company at one point where she was helping me travel around the world and do educational arrangements for public companies, governments, banks, things like that, to teach them about Bitcoin and digital assets. And so I was still in the space. I was just doing it more from a private perspective, not with this other company I was building. Got it. And then it came full circle when I was able to join back up with Brian's and kind of build that up.
Very cool. How was the educational effort? Was that pretty successful, or were you meeting a lot of resistance?
It depended on where. Yeah. So in the United States, I was usually meeting with innovation groups and executive teams at very large companies. They were very open to it. but they weren't wanting to like bite the bullet and kind of jump into it real quick.
Yeah.
They're open to learn about it. They're like, oh, it's interesting that we have somebody that we know now that has an education on this and can teach us, but we're not interested in like launching products in this yet. But in other areas of the world, they were. So I did a lot of work in Seoul, Korea, and they were very advanced in it. So their government actually like retained to bring me over there to Seoul to educate people. I was doing conferences over there and giving fireside chats and keynotes on Bitcoin and digital assets. And I did that in several places. In Russia, I did it in a variety of different places around the world. And so some other regions were more open to it. Early, the public companies that I spoke to in the United States in the very early days were a little more, they weren't resistant. They just weren't trying to like pull the trigger on moving forward with it at that time.
Yeah. I remember giving a presentation to a family office consortium in Santa Monica, and it was 2017. Yeah. So it was like, bull market was raging, and a lot of smart money, air quotes, guys are there. I'm giving the whole spiel on Bitcoin and crypto at the time, actually. And they basically, I don't want to say they laughed us out of the room, but they were like making fun of Bitcoin, right? Like all the questions were like, oh, what's the difference between Bitcoin and a tulip? And, like, it's just so funny how far we've come in, 8-ish years. I don't know. That's why I was curious about the educational stuff. Cause I just remember doing it. I was like beating this drum, like, guys, pay attention. And everyone's just like, pfft.
I've experienced the same thing. I had the same tulip questions, the same type of situations where people are like, this is never going to work, ever. It's like, I respect your opinion, but I disagree. Respectfully disagree. But there's always, like in the early days, there's the 10 to 20% of the room that's intrigued. And maybe that's enough just so that they go home and Google Bitcoin and they kind of go down the rabbit path. And then it's like, maybe I provided some value there. And I kind of opened the window a little bit so they can step through.
For sure.
But in the early days, the vast majority in the room was like, oh, this is an interesting little thing, but it's never going to work. And then over each year, slightly that room percentage of people that wanted to peek through the window got a little bit bigger.
Right. It grows exponentially. And then, price just sucks people in and the process repeats. In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a Citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. You were saying you guys run like a Warren Buffett style investment strategy. What does that mean? Like, what is that strategy? I mean, I think some people probably have a general idea of it, but maybe give me some specifics.
Yeah.
And then how have you applied that to Bitcoin blockchain universe?
Of course. So off the chain, we're basically, when I say Warren Buffett or Benjamin Graham died deep discount, what we're looking to do is find undervalued assets in the space or discounted assets in the space that then we can try to accumulate and then sell when they're fairly valued, or when we remove the discount, we're able to get a better mark with the net investment. And so what we mean by that, a great example is Mt. Gox. So a lot of people in the Bitcoin community are familiar with Mt. Gox, which was the first major bankruptcy in the Bitcoin space. This happened in 2014. They had around 850,000 Bitcoin on their exchange. It was hacked and those Bitcoin were stolen. The exchange was able to recover about 141,000 of those stolen Bitcoin.
So out of how many, you said?
Out of 850,000 that were stolen.
They only recovered 140.
About 141,000 approximately.
That's it? They ever recovered?
No, so supposedly, as the theory goes, and we had actually worked with the Department of Justice to kind of poke this and figure out what happened, is the hacker allegedly was this Russian hacker that then turned it over to the Russian Secret Service before he got taken into custody. And then since the United States didn't have any jurisdiction over that, or some of these other countries didn't have any jurisdiction over that, allegedly it's potentially still there. I don't know for sure, but that's kind of the theory that we were able to uncover through doing some legal
in Russia's possession,
sleuthing, potentially.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And so the light bulb that we had with that was that, oh, wow, this is a bankruptcy proceeding now, right? And in bankruptcy law in the United States, this is a big differentiator because this bankruptcy happened in Japan. In the US, generally, if a company goes bankrupt and there's liquid assets involved, those liquid assets will get struck at the cash value at the point of the bankruptcy filing. And then when the bankruptcy concludes, the creditors who are due back a percentage of those recovered assets will get paid out cash based on the assets value at the point of the filing.
Wow.
So that's generally what happens. In Japanese bankruptcy law, it's different in that when the bankruptcy concludes, you get the liquid asset itself. So if you get any additional performance over the time period that bankruptcy happened, you can see that and you're going to receive it because you get the liquid asset.
Right.
So that was a big light bulb moment for us. So basically, our team went over to Japan and developed this relationship with the trustee that basically allowed us to acquire these Bitcoin bankruptcy claims. So in the early days, we were getting Bitcoin for free. And what I mean by that is when we were buying the claims, inside a claim, there's approximately 0.18 Bitcoin, 0.18 Bitcoin cash, and about $700 in currency. And we were buying the claims for $500 a piece.
Wow.
So we were getting the Bitcoin for a huge discount, right? Like a massive discount.
Why are people selling it for less than the cash value?
Because when you're in a bankruptcy,
when
you're in a bankruptcy, and also when it's the first Bitcoin bankruptcy ever, there's a ton of uncertainty.
Gotcha.
And so people get impatient, they get motivated to sell. And that's what we look for. We look for Forrester motivated sellers. And so we're saying, look, we can be patient. Not only are we getting a discount on the Bitcoin, we're getting Bitcoin's future performance because they pay out the Bitcoin when the bankruptcy concludes. And so that worked out really great for us because we were able to accumulate a lot of these claims, and then we just got to sit there until the bankruptcy concluded. It actually got paid out in mid-2024, and we were able to see that liquid value now within the portfolio. So that's an example of something that we would do. Same concept with private companies. We'll find Forrester-motivated sellers of very mature blockchain companies that want liquidity, but they can't find it, and we'll offer them that liquidity. And usually they're going through life situations. They're getting married, having a child, buying a home. They want some liquidity for the value they've built, but there's not a lot of buyers all the time. So we'll step in and act as that liquidity provider.
Wow. Amazing. Well, and you guys have grown significantly running that strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. This is where I think you and I, when we connected originally, I think this is something we just sort of vibed on, but you're a philosophical guy. And obviously you're into Bitcoin as well. I have this, I don't know, is intuition, I don't know what it's a developing realization. I feel like that for a long time, people have talked about, what we need is, revolution in human consciousness. We're not going to ever transcend the human condition until we have this, it has to start on the inside, basically, right? We need individual consciousnesses to wake up to the reality of what we are, and then that's how we step forward. I think my developing realization is that Bitcoin is that, or is at least an integral part of that. I think this is something where you and I sort of connect on. So what is it about Bitcoin that you see it as, I guess this is like the philosophy of Bitcoin, or how you see it as restructuring even to human consciousness?
First, I want to take a quick step back about how I think about consciousness. So I think consciousness itself is often perceived as something that a human being emits or that is part of. how I actually view consciousness as I've gone through more life experiences is I think consciousness just exists beyond, and we're like a receiver of it. So like
an antenna type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like using Elon Musk as an example, like this guy has an ability to receive data and information from this field of consciousness in a way where he creates these brilliant inventions that like change the world, right? So in a sense, it's possible that Bitcoin in and of itself, when Satoshi Nakamoto, who that is, or who that group of people is that created it, sucked this data in from this field, this universal field, because we're like these antennas of consciousness.
Right.
And every so often throughout history, something occurs that fundamentally re-architects the reality of human consciousness. And I think Bitcoin is one of those things. This is a once in 500 or once in 1,000 year type innovation that's occurring. And the vast majority of the world still does not fully grasp what's happening. And the reason I think it's a re-architecture of reality is because for so many years, we've relied on this traditional system of how value is exchanged around the world, right? Like many, many years ago, it was shells and salt and things like that that we used. And then over time, that transitioned to gold. And then gold wasn't very portable and divisible, so we sliced it off into gold coins. And then that even got diluted down over time. And then eventually we went to paper notes, and that was used for many, many years. And then we went from there into banking accounts and credit card systems. And then when Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71, we have been on this fiat experiment since then, right? And this fiat experiment is clearly failing right before our eyes. People can't, they're fighting to get by. The vast majority of the world is fighting to make ends meet. And when you think about like in our lifetimes with us growing up, our parents, like the dollar was worth so much more then, right? Like a dollar would go so much further than what it does today. And now you have people working multiple jobs that still can't afford their basic necessities. That is a crime against humanity, in my opinion. Everybody in the world should be able to meet basic necessities and be able to thrive if they choose to, if they put the energy into that. And the way the system is designed today is that because of the fiat standard that's failing, it prevents a lot of people from being able to do that, you know? And so what Bitcoin does is it creates a mechanism whereby we are architecting this brand new reality that's a parallel system to what's happening. And I think over time it gets integrated into the traditional system. But it's created this mechanism whereby you can make ends meet. You can store value over time and space in a very unique way that's never happened before. You can take your value from the internet off the internet and put it in your pocket and go to a different country and upload it back to the internet. Like if you wanted to do that with $1 billion of gold, you need a military to move that gold. With Bitcoin, I put it in my pocket, right? And you can send it at the speed of light. So it's such a unique thing that's so big, because if you think about what's at the tippy top of the pyramid of our global financial system is the monetary system. Everything else falls below that.
For sure.
Business, enterprise, government, everything falls below the monetary system. And when you have a new technology that fundamentally disrupts how our monetary system has worked for tons and tons of years, it is a once in 1,000 year type innovation that's fundamentally going to expand people's consciousness and allow us to live, in my opinion, a better, more wholesome life over time.
That's such an interesting perspective. I had Robert Grant on the show. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's like a mathematician, philosopher, polymath type guy. And his translation, I think he speaks Japanese and several other languages. His translation of Satoshi Nakamoto was wisdom from the field, actually.
Interesting.
I have to refer back to the episode to actually how he derived that, because I've heard other translations, people saying it means central intelligence and things like this. But so it's funny that you say that, right? That we are downloading data from the field of consciousness, and then we can, through our actions, imprint that into reality. And so if Bitcoin does change the way the monetary system has worked for thousands of years, then it actually changes people's ability to download data from the field and imprint their imaginations into reality, because they're not, they're basically being held back. Like right now, prudence, for instance, under the fiat paradigm is penalized, right? If you work hard, spend less than you earn, and save, well, you're penalized by inflation for doing that. Now, obviously, you can diversify into other assets and whatnot, but that's forcing you to take risk that you really shouldn't have to as a saver. And so it inverts the entire calculus of like delayed gratification and what economics and investment is all about. And so if we can uninvert that with Bitcoin, then all of a sudden you start rewarding prudence and delayed gratification and long time horizons and, investment and
basic
collaboration.
moral values.
Yes, right. Right. It quickly exceeds the economic definitions and goes into the moral, right? It's like, the big open question, I guess, in Bitcoin circles is like, how much do material incentives shape our experience? One of the good definitions I heard of consciousness recently in a podcast was, this is notoriously hard to define, right? This is kind of like trying to define, it's a metacognitive thing. Like just like when you're trying to define language or words, you're always trapped within language or words. So it's hard to talk about, you can't take that step outside of the system that is necessary to sort of frame and define it. Same is true with consciousness. It's even called the hard problem, right? But one useful definition that I heard recently was that consciousness is that field in which excitations are experience. So basically, human experience is consciousness. So if Bitcoin is changing our experience of how money, finance, incentives, economics, human collaboration, all these things work, then it is actually going to change our experiences. Mm-hmm. And if it does that profoundly enough and ubiquitously enough, then that is almost indistinguishable from a revolution in human consciousness. So it sounds crazy. I know like people that are outside of Bitcoin, this sounds totally like we drink the Kool-Aid, we're in a cult, and we are in a cult, I guess. But I don't know. A lot of people keep arriving at the same-ish conclusion from different angles, and that consilience is very fascinating to me.
Nikola Tesla used to say that there is this field of knowledge, this universal knowledge that exists within the ether that all ideas are drawn upon. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated with me when I've read that before, and that's kind of helped shape my view of how I interpret consciousness, and that we kind of suck in this data or information. Mm-hmm. And maybe because the world has gotten so far off the beaten path, and it's had such a huge disruption of moral and ethical standards on a global scale, that the knowledge from within this universe said, okay, it's time. Mm-hmm. It's time that somebody's going to suck this data in to create Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a solution that will have ripple effects occur all around the world to help solve some of these major, major issues that are going on in the world. And so it was time that universal intelligence was drawn in to then create the Bitcoin standard, which hopefully, as we're seeing over time and we're seeing right now, is a solution to so many different types of issues around the world.
What are some historical analogies? I know you said once in a 500 year, once in a 1,000 year kind of thing. Could be once in a species, right? We don't really know how big of a deal this thing is yet. It's been compared to the printing press. It's been compared to electricity. It's been compared to the discovery of fire. Your partner, Brian Estes, also a friend of mine, he put out a great tweet that I referenced a lot, comparing it to Christ, actually, that Christ was this revolution in consciousness, or in like human moral software, if you want to put it that way, in kind of a pragmatic way. And he drew parallels between the emergence of Bitcoin and how Christ changed the world and how Bitcoin promises to change the world. How do you frame this Bitcoin phenomenon? How significant and profound do you think it is?
I look at it as a lot of the same analogies that you just gave, like fire, the wheel. Like I think in history, we'll look back at it and say, wow, like this fundamentally changed how life happens moving forward. And if you look at it from like a spiritual perspective, like every major world religion is something that requires a huge movement of people to adopt over time, right? And it becomes this spiritual, this new religious construct. That's how any religion ever started. Yeah. And that is kind of what's occurring with Bitcoin. Like you joked before, it was like we're in this Bitcoin cult in a sense, right? Well, look at the definition of a cult. It's actually the same for any major spiritual or religious practice in a sense. There's just a negative connotation with cult because of what we know about how cults play out.
It's a startup religion, right?
Exactly. So over time, when you think about Bitcoin, people do feel spiritual about it. They feel religious about it because in a sense, it is creating a new component of spirituality that allows you to awaken to what's really been going on around the world, which fundamentally changes how you think about life, right? And when you wake up to that and you actually have that eureka moment, you're like, wow, there really is that unique feeling of, I was blind and now I can see.
Yes.
And because of that, I think that's what gives it this religious or spiritual connection.
Yes. No, it's an excellent point. And then, money is often described as a belief system. So, and a religion is often described as a belief system. So there is this like religious component to any of these social constructs we create, right? Like, civil liberties, right? Or innocent until proven guilty, like all these ideas that we sort of, I think of them as software, basically. It's like software components that we download. They're cultural software components, which, back to the word cult, is like it's right in the word culture, right? Mm-hmm. Every culture is basically cultish to some extent. And they're points of agreement that we have, right? Like we decide, oh, thou shalt not kill. Okay, well, it becomes morally condemned and eventually legally condemned to kill other people for good reason, right? It's like, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means that you should not do it, right? It's not descriptive of reality, it's prescriptive. And it's telling you something about the way we should be to achieve certain common ends, which are like, you could draw the big circle around it of human flourishing, basically. And so how this still, again, as I'm even saying this, it's like people here, once you start bringing religion into it, then people are like, see, I told you, you guys are in a cult, you're all crazy. But it's almost like there's a religiousness to any of these games we're playing with one another. The United States is a religion, right? In a way, it's like people believe these certain tenets under this symbolic structure and they act accordingly. And that's same thing you do in a religion, same thing you do with the money, et cetera. So are we just using different words to describe like different aspects of the same construct? Is it, humans are all playing these imaginary games together? And I don't know. What do you think about that?
I would agree with that. I think it's probably a lot of the same thing, right? And we're just using different verbal constructs for it, different spiritual constructs for it. And there's that old saying that's 3 things you never discuss around the dinner table is money, politics, and religion.
Right.
Which is great about Bitcoin because it involves all 3 of those. So Bitcoin has brought back being able to talk about money, religion, and politics at the dinner table, right?
Yes.
Because it touches on all of those. And I agree. It's like we're looking at this thing as the same way that a new spiritual adoption would take place. And as that grows over time, as any spiritual practice or as any religious practice, you're going to have people that are like way off the deep end, right? Or you're going to have people that don't believe in it. Right. And then you're going to have people that have more of an equilibrium, right, with it and are more balanced with it. And that's of any religion. Think about it. There's religious fanatics. Right. There's people that are atheists that don't believe in any religion. Yeah. And then there's people in the middle that take an approach of, oh, I'm Christian or I'm Hindu or I'm Buddhist, whatever that happens to be. And so I think we see that in Bitcoin too. We have people that are way off the Richter, radical Bitcoiners. We have people that think it's totally fake and never going to work still. Right. And then we have people in somewhere that fall in the middle.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. Every religion has all its different denominations, right? Which are across that gradient, so to speak. That's a really interesting point you brought up, the whole thing. We never talk, 3 things you never talk about. Because what is that saying about those things? It's like, those are the domain of human conflict but it's a paradox, right? Because they're also the domain of human agreement, right? Like, you would want to talk about religion and politics and money if you knew everyone at the table is like, a Bitcoiner and a conservative and whatever your things are, right? Then you can all agree about everything. But it seems to be those domains too, where if there's disagreement, it's like very close to our structure of our identity. And so our belief, there's some threshold at which our belief structures become like our identity structures. And I think that's why people get so up in arms, like, during election season. I think it's also why we have Bitcoin derangement syndrome. Like these people that really, really don't like Bitcoin, they're like psycho don't like Bitcoin, right? Like I'm thinking of the old guy yelling on stage, like, it's going to zero. It's going to zero. It's like, dude, relax. Like, if you don't like it, you don't like it. Just don't buy it.
For sure.
Move on with your day. Like, why are you yelling at everyone?
Do your own thing. Yeah. Do your own thing.
So it's that particular point you brought up though. It's like, what is it about those things? It's
my opinion is that politics, money, and religion are 3 things that all throughout time have been used to control people. Okay? So money can be used to control people on a fiat standard. Yep. We've seen that. Puts them in debt and indentured servitude. Religion has been used for thousands and thousands of years to control people in all different forms and fashions. And politics are governed in a structure to literally control people. You have a set of laws. You must follow these statutes. You must follow these rules. And you're right, what you said. I totally agree that those three things fall so deeply within an individual's identity and their psyche that it's like blowing their head open to try to argue with them on these things because they're so deep rooted in their views with them.
Yeah.
And think about it from this perspective. What if one of the reasons we're so deep rooted in these views is because most people don't want to admit they're being controlled and there's nothing they can do about it?
Right. Yeah. No one wants to admit that. No one wants to admit that they were the victim of a psyop, or they're not free, or they don't have autonomy. It's interesting. What was coming up for me there too is like, if you even just take the face of a dollar bill, well, you have the religious component, right? In God we trust. You have the political component. There's a photo of some dead US president on there. And then it has all this like religious symbolism on it as well, right? There's the pyramid with the eye above it, and it's just like all this projection of symbolic authority mixed with political authority, mixed with religious authority. And it's like that, that captures it, right? It's like, if you don't, it sounds silly, but it's like, well, just look at the bill. Like, why is all that on that bill?
And what I always thought about the bill is when you look at the eye, like from the pyramid that's coming out, what that secret eye is basically the all-seeing knowledge, right? And it's almost like the people that constructed it knew the control mechanisms they were putting in place, but that was a hidden knowledge. That was a secret knowledge. But through the symbolism, they were winking at you, saying, we know what's going on, but you don't, right?
Yeah. Give me the power to issue a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws.
Absolutely.
I mean, central bankers definitely know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right? You can't, one thing we cannot do is say they're not fucking clever and insidious even. Like it's brilliant, I would say.
You have to have a small group of really smart people historically could pretty easily control the whole world.
Yes.
And the way that they do it, in my opinion, you keep them fed, you keep them entertained, you keep them liquored up so their consciousness is at a lower state.
Bread and circuses.
And and circuses. And through that path, like you just keep people in a constant state of sleepwalking through life.
Yes.
And if you're sleepwalking through life, you're not going to ask too many questions. You're definitely not going to revolt, but if you've got your bag of chips and your processed soda and you're sitting on the couch watching Netflix every night and then you're getting up and you're doing the same thing, going to work and coming home, and that's your life cycle, you're not going to revolt. You're not going to cause any issues. And you get all your information from this device or from that screen that sits on the wall and you don't think outside the box or try to do your own diligence and research about what's really going on. You are controlled. Whether you like it or not, you are being controlled. And also, if we look at it from an agricultural perspective, the very foods that have been infiltrated into the U.S. food supply, I mean, we have like thousands of ingredients that are banned in most other countries, and we eat them here. My like big macro view of that is because if you can make people sick, obviously it plays into the pharma component, right?
Yes.
But even beyond that, if you can dumb somebody down by the ingredients they're consuming on a daily basis, there's a far less likely chance they're ever going to try to revolt or come after a control structure. Right. And that allows the people that are manipulating society to stay in their statue,
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I think a lot of it is born from economic ignorance, though, because if you actually understand Austrian economics, you actually want a lot of people really free thinking, trading with each other as intensely as possible. Like you want give people really strong private property and a lot of freedom, and you get a lot of abundance, right? And we've seen this, that's like theoretically enshrined in the Austrian economic tradition, but we have a lot of empirical evidence of that too, where we've seen, well, this country was an experiment in that, right? As we had very low predictable taxation, strong rule of law, and boom, we're the biggest economic success story in all of nation state history, basically. You had Hong Kong, the Hong Kong miracle was something similar. We've seen the success of like give people life, liberty, property, and leave them alone, right? And it creates economic abundance. But there's something, I don't know, I guess it's the dark side of human nature that there is that even self-predating instinct where if someone can opportunistically just take from someone or create a system that takes from them forever, they must be ignorant because they are inhibiting the total capacity of the human race to achieve new things, right? In terms of innovation, productivity, and all. Like you are preventing the human race from leveling up in your own selfish pursuit to acquire as much as possible. And so like if we could give those people. I mean, it's a loose term, but like people, I always say shareholders of central banks to be a catch-all. If you could give them the software update of Austrian economics, like, hey guys, this predatory system that you think is making you rich, it is making you rich relatively. But what you're not seeing is how, like, I don't know, the spaceships or whatever we'd be inventing if you weren't running the system on people. Mm-hmm. Like if you gave people a lot of freedom, a strong rule of law and strong private property, we would have already colonized the stars, something like that. And so it's the case of the seen versus the unseen, that you see the current money this thing is making you. What you don't see is all of the unrealized potential of the human race that is a consequence of that.
I agree. And what's interesting about the seen versus the unseen, this concept that you break up, is about 0.05% of the invisible light spectrum is what we experience reality in.
Yes.
So that means the vast majority of what's going on around us every day exists in the unseen realm.
Yes.
And this kind of brings it back to consciousness as well. As human beings, I believe, there's the mental and philosophical standpoint of this, there's the physical standpoint of this, mm-hmm. and there's the spiritual standpoint of this. Yeah. One of the things that's occurred over many, many years, I believe, is the intentional infiltration, like I noted before, that can dumb down the human race. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is we're consuming ingredients today that are actually calcifying the pineal gland that exists within the center of our brain. Mm-hmm. And for people that may not be familiar with what that is, within the center of the human brain, there is a pine cone looking organ called the pineal gland. Mm-hmm. The pineal gland actually in ancient civilizations was what was believed to be the connector between the spiritual realm and the astral realm and the human realm that we interface in. Mm-hmm. And if you look in like ancient Egyptian artifacts and hieroglyphs and a lot of ancient Indian spiritual practices and cultures, they worshipped this third eye, this pineal gland. That's what it is. The third eye is the pineal gland.
Yeah, right in the core of the brain, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so over time, through fluoridation in the water supply and toothpaste and things like that, through negative ingredients that have entered our food supply, it actually calcifies the pineal gland in the human brain. And you don't know how important this is until you remove those things from your diet. And then all of a sudden, like, you start opening up and starting becoming more aware of synchronicities and winks from the universe that happen throughout your daily life. But when your pineal gland is very calcified, it actually blocks that from happening. It's almost like it blocks your spiritual connection with your human connection. And I think that's part of this too, because if you can have this control structure that has figured out a way to then dumb human beings down by intentionally putting stuff in ingredients that calcify this pineal gland, it's such a powerful connector between the astral world and the human world, then you are then allowing them to not ask questions as much, be docile like a sheep, right? And when you can clean that stuff up and remove that stuff from your diet or just your life in general, and things that can, allow you to expand your level of conscious awareness, then you wake up, you become more enabled to understand Bitcoin. You become more enabled to understand these bigger philosophical concepts that are creating such a disruption in the world today.
That's such an excellent point. The fact that we can only visually perceive, I think it was 5% of the electromagnetic spectrum. Maybe it's less. I'm not really sure, but it's a very small percentage of the total electromagnetic spectrum. That should be a very humbling thing, right? It's like, well, okay, look, we think what we see is truth, but we know through our instrumentation and theory that actually we see most of what we see, or we see a very small sliver of the truth, if even that, right? Like we are, again, if our senses are like reducing reality to a wavelength that we can interpret, basically, because if we took it all in, it'd just be overwhelming. But that third eye is interesting, right? And this is something that you can exercise through meditation, spiritual practice, solitude, fasting, psychedelics. Like there's a whole litany of things that can help that organ tap into whatever it's tapped into, the field of consciousness, presumably. That's where my experience is deep in meditation is that you can get to a place of no time, no space. And so that is getting beyond what's available to our immediate senses. And also I'm not great about it lately, but when I've had a consistent meditation practice in the past, I've noticed that every time I get to that place and I come back from the meditation, I have those downloads you were describing earlier. Like they just hit you, like a book will just fall in your, not a book, but a passage will just fall into my brain. And like, it's not the words coming in. It's just like, you just get a download. Doof.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I'm in the notes app. Like I got to type it down before I forget.
Yeah.
I also get it a little bit like glimmers of it when I'm exercising sometimes really intensely. I think that can also sort of, I don't know, maybe activate that extra sensory perception that we have. And so it would make a lot of sense if you wanted to control people on the physical plane, you would do everything you could to clog that thing, right? So yeah, it sounds like conspiracy theorists, but I mean, there's a lot of, there's a good reason behind it if you're thinking about it from a maniacal standpoint.
And from a maniacal standpoint, I believe that this kind of agenda, you don't put this in 10 years, right? This is a generation upon generation play out that's occurring. And it's interesting as it plays out, right? Because I feel like now we're reaching this point in society where there's enough knowledge and our access to information is at such ease that you can learn about these things and you don't have to be so controlled if you choose not to be.
Yes.
And but you have to choose, right?
Yes.
Everyone has a choice. You have to choose not to be controlled. You have to figure out where to go get your information from, which is challenging too today because with the advancements in artificial intelligence, we're going to reach a point real quick where you don't know what's real and you don't know what's fake because it's becoming so realistic and the ability for it to exponentially grow and become more evolved and more realistic over time. I think that's going to be interesting. I think one of the things we're going to have is there's going to have to be some technology that comes out, and it's probably going to be blockchain authenticated. I would think that when there's a real piece of content, there's a blockchain based authenticated signature on it, so you know it's real because you will have indistinguishable AI from real situations. And when that happens, it's like, how do you know if something's true? Like, what can you believe anymore?
Right.
And there's an old saying from the former CIA director, William Casey, I believe his name was. And his quote was, when every single thing the American public believes is false, we will know our disinformation campaign is complete. And AI is going to take that to the next level.
That is so scary. That is so scary. Yeah, you need a proof of real, I've heard it called.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good way to put it.
People need to build, because all of this digital content that we're going to be increasingly inundated with, we're not going to be able to substantiate the source without something. Like there needs to be a cryptographic signature proving its authenticity or proving the creator. You know, if someone creates a fake AI podcast of me that's indistinguishable from me, it's like, well, I need to have a way to sign the one that's real and not sign the one that's not real.
Sure.
Right. Otherwise, it's just going to, people can just replicate your persona and do whatever they want under your name, basically. So yeah, things are not going to get less weird. They're definitely going to get more weird. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware's mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few strokes of the keyboard. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with 0 lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with 0 long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your miner's energy bill for the first week of each of your mining rigs when you sign up at mining.blockware.com. mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Reality. I mean, here's a word that people throw around. It's like, oh, reality, it's truth, it's fact, it's not changeable. It is what it is. But we've talked about consciousness, like, experience is basically the only thing that we really have. And if all of that is just excitations of this field of consciousness, then where do we distinguish between consciousness and reality? Or is consciousness and reality the same thing? Basically, how do you look at the true nature of the world versus the nature of the world as it appears to us?
The way that I perceive how our reality works after many life experiences and going through things, and this is an evolving education that I'm going, so I'm not going to say this is set in stone. As I understand it today, I think that our entire reality that we live out every day is a holographic projection over this brilliant energy architecture that's too far advanced for the human mind to comprehend. And what I mean by that is that although us as humans are living out these different experiences, we're basically just projecting off of one thing, and there's not actually any separateness between us. And a great example that I like to give is if you're standing on the beach and you're looking at the waves in the ocean coming in, sometimes those waves get so big that perceptually for a second, it almost looks that wave is separate from the ocean itself. But at the base of the wave, it's the ocean.
Yeah.
That's what I think our reality is. I think although you and I live out separate life experiences, beyond what we can see in this small visible light spectrum, there is zero separateness. Like we're the same energy. We're the same thing, but we're living out these different things, just like different waves would crash on the ocean, but the base is still the ocean, right? And when you think through that more, it starts to make sense. And what I mean by that is, imagine a situation where I could be thinking of you, and then all of a sudden you text me 20 seconds later.
Yeah.
I'm picking that up from a field of intelligence that I wasn't thinking about. I'm decoding it, but maybe it's because you, since there is no separateness potentially, you were thinking of me. You wanted to send something to me in a message. So I picked up on that wavelength, and all of a sudden that's data that I'm decoding in my human experience. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what's up with Robert? And then all of a sudden I get a text from you, right? Like that stuff happens to me all the time. Like I'll think of something and then it happens. I also have an interesting situation that happens to me constantly where I dream something and then 4 to 6 weeks later it happens. And it's always something totally random, right? Like it could be us having this podcast and I like turn left and I look at something on the table and then boom, the deja vu hits me and I'm like, I dreamt that 5 weeks ago. It's something as basic as that. But if that's happening, it also attributes to the point of, what if the past, the present, and the future are not the past, the present, and the future? What if everything is potentially occurring simultaneously and we're just decoding this information differently? And so it's a very far out topic to think through, right? And it's way more advanced than we're ever going to understand at the human level, probably, because that's why we're humans. I think it's to experience this infinite energy, this infinite intelligence, and where these different experiences playing out. So maybe the universe itself can't do it on its own. So it has to actually do it through a human experience to be able to touch and feel things and experience taste and smells and relationships and emotions. And maybe that's all that it is. Maybe it's just, it's creating a channel whereby it can have these experiences because it could never do it on its own. And something I've thought about a lot is, what would happen in the world if everybody simultaneously if this was true and everybody simultaneously woke up and realized we are literally not separate? Would it create like this wake up, and then all of a sudden we go back to this earlier form of maybe what we are? I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to ponder.
No, it's fascinating. And all the religious motifs start coming to mind. Like, we're made in the image of the Creator, right? So Imago Dei, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This idea that this is from an old Jewish text, right? Where a God that's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, so all powerful, all knowing, and all everywhere, basically. What does that entity lack? And the answer was limitation, basically. So to complete itself or himself, God has to create this finite being that is imprinted with his image, but is not him. And so because he has lack. His lack is limitation. Well, what are we? We're mortals. Everything's limited for us, right? Our time, our attention, economic scarcity, all the things, right? And so there's something about that balance between, we'll use the word God and man, basically. And this comes up a lot in religious texts. And so the metaphor that I find useful, because I found when I was reading a lot about complex systems theory and economics and biology, it's actually very difficult to draw a line between living and non-living systems. They typically use the term autopoiesis, which is like a system, it's a self-organizing system that seeks out conditions that further its self-organization. So the rough example a guy like John Vervaeke will give is, okay, a tornado is self-organizing, but it's not alive because a tornado will just run into something that, extinguishes it basically. It won't it doesn't chase victims around like a jaguar, right? Whereas, a human being, we're self-organizing as well, but we're also, we want to get a job and we want to sleep in a house and we want to plan for the next week. Like we're trying to create conditions that further our future self-organization, basically. So, my intuition hypothesis is that the whole thing is alive, basically. Like the whole thing is an organism, top to bottom. I mean, even stars have life cycles, right? There's, we can examine the light and size of a star, and we can tell you what its life will be like, just like we can do this with organisms. So if that's the case, then we are interfacing with this cosmic organism, and we're like basically the cells, I guess, of this cosmic organism, or we're basically extreme microorganisms of this macroorganism. Things that we do, right? In that case, we are all connected, right? We're all connected under the corpus of this universal organism. And so for me, that starts to bring a physical or even metaphysical reality to ethics and to morality. It's like, okay, if you go out into the world and you're a serial killer and you start killing people, it's like, well, that cosmic organism is not going to like that you're basically a disease on the organism, right? It's like you're killing these other cells that it's using or acting through or engaging with for whatever purpose. And so it's going to, he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword, right? And the opposite would also be true, right? If you're a very good person and you're taking care of other people and you're living your life in truth and leading people towards greater individual freedom and what have you, the universe would want to promote your interest and serve you because you're serving it, right? You get this mutually beneficial reciprocity going on. And so I don't know, it gets very strange. Like when we start talking like this, people are like, woo woo, whatever. But for me, it's a very useful metaphor. And I think as someone that was hyper materialist, rational atheist, and kind of like my teenage years, started to come out of it in my early 20s, thanks to yoga, meditation, all of these things. This feels correct to me. Like I know when I've led my life and made it about me, my life has gone off track. And then when I've made my life, really trying to disciple myself in, walking in the way of Christ, trying to even imitating other people like Buddha, Socrates. Doesn't have to be, I guess Buddha's, I don't know if he's religious or philosophical, but Socrates is not a religious figure per se, but imitating his spirit of open inquiry and honesty and truth-telling and truth-seeking, like all of those, and that's for the benefit of others, right? I mean, it benefits you too, but it also benefits others. Mm-hmm. That's when my life really gets good and better and feels better, and I feel more connected to the world and more synchronicities start happening. So like I'm throwing a lot out there, but like that's why it feels useful and valuable to me to think of it that way. Like I take that hyper rationalist part of myself and I find a metaphor that actually justifies or substantiates things that I've learned in these other wisdom traditions and religions. And so that's where I'm at with it currently. Like, again, I don't, like you said, we're learning in the human experience, trying to put words to this. I love Joseph Campbell's, sorry, I'll finish with this. I've been on a long one. Joseph Campbell said something like, I'm paraphrasing here, that religions were stories that people ascribed to, different stories that people ascribed to the one transcendental mystery that we all experience.
Okay.
So we're all in this experience of there's something beyond what we can say or describe. And then we start trying to put words to it. And that's what these religious motifs
Then we create
are.
a construct basically over time, right? And you brought up a really important point. So like you were talking about this organism that like, oh, if you're going around killing people, that's not the right thing. So it's going to kind of eradicate that in some form or fashion. You're getting things out of balance. The energy is out of balance. And, you know, when you really think through that a little bit, everybody is kind of meant to be in balance at all times. I think that's our natural state is balance, but we have all these outside and external factors that throw us out of balance. And when we're born as a species, when you really think about it, humans are born to love and they're taught to hate, right? Like you're not born and all of a sudden you just grow up and you're like killing people, right? You're taught to hate. You're programmed to hate. But you're born, your natural state really is like love and like abundance and like being one and balanced, right? And using like Christianity as an example, right? So you were talking about like Jesus and Buddha. I actually interpret Jesus much more like most people would probably interpret Buddha. And what I mean by that is that Jesus was not Christian. Christianity was a religious construct crafted around Jesus' lives. And Constantine sat around a table and said, I want this book in the Bible and this book in the Bible and this book and not this book. Let's keep that one out. What did he keep out is the real question. But Jesus was not Christian, right? What was he when you really think about it? He was an individual that was incredibly enlightened, that figured out how in every situation in life, for the most part, at least that in recorded text that we're aware of, he exuded love.
Yes.
Right? That's kind of what Buddha does. He exudes love and balance, right? And I think that's often forgotten when we think about these religious constructs, because people will get so pertinent on the main character, that who's the hero's journey of this particular story, and they're so wrapped up in the construct itself that they forget at first principles. This person was just saying love each other. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. And we allow through these divinities and all these different derivatives of different type of religious constructs to get way more complicated than that, right? It's like when we think about ourselves as an identity, right? Like, who am I? My name's Brian. I do this. I run this company. I'm a person. I do X, Y, and Z. These are all identities. And the more identities that you have, the narrower your perceptive field of this universal intelligence is that we have. But when you wipe all of that out of the way, kind of like what it seems like Jesus figured out was we're just abundant love in the universe, right? And if you can exude that and exchange that with people around you in every scenario, things are probably going to go pretty good for you. And that's kind of what he proved out when you really think about it.
Amen to that. No, it's a great point. There was a fantastic podcast. I don't know the name of the gentleman. He was on the Aubrey podcast recently, but it was about Christ. And he said, there was a very profound line. He goes, Christ did not come to be worshiped. He came to be imitated. It's like Christ was trying to set that example, right? He's the perfection of human consciousness in a way. And he's leading by example. Like, here's how you should strive to be. Although you will never attain this standard that he is the standard bearer of, we should strive with all of our hearts and all of our minds to try and be Christ-like, to, again, optimize for human flourishing. And if you think about it, and people actually did that, that would create optimal conditions for human flourishing. People were turning the other cheek and loving thy brother, loving thy neighbor as thyself, loving God above all else, which you could interpret as like having humility when it comes to knowledge. I always think that the totalitarian mindset is like the opposite of God. It's when you think you are God, basically, right? You think you know it all. You have ideas so good that you have to bludgeon them into people's head. Whereas the reality is this unfolding lovingness that is kind of the nature of reality. Like, creation just happens and unfolds, and we should strive to be more like that. There's a really interesting point you made there too, that this ties back to our earlier thing about politics, religion, and money, that we're born loving, but we learn to hate. I think the learning to hate is almost always for one of those three reasons, right? It's like we're either politically aligned against someone, right? They're a different tribe or a different nation or different political party, or they don't believe in the same religious construct as you do. So there's been a lot of religious warfare historically. or people are fighting over material resources, right? Which money is emblematic of. So yeah, it's like everyone wants love and belonging, but then in this spiritual training ground or whatever it is that we're in physical reality, we encounter these, again, they're limitations that we start to fight over and fight around and use to justify our fighting. Like when I think of the religious conflicts, they're especially bad. Both sides think they're doing God's work and they'll just literally
kill each other for it.
They'll fight until the bitter end, right? Because they have such deep conviction.
That's not very godlike when you think about it.
It's not godlike at all. Yeah. So it's like there's these inversions occurring. And but again, it all centered around politics, religion, and money.
Yeah. And you mentioned limitations. So that's one of the ways I think of the human experience as well, is we're bound within a limitation that is the human body when you think about it. Like the way I look at this,
time, in space.
Yeah. The way I look at this right here is my earth suit.
Yeah.
All right. This is my earth suit. I have this incarnation. I have this thing inside the earth suit that's kind of guiding me around, and I'm going through lessons and I'm evolving and I'm learning. And then when this earth suit gets older, this earth suit's got to expire. And then maybe I go back to the infinite intelligence, or then maybe I jump into a new earth suit, or I don't really know. We don't really know. But there's a lot of different ways to think about that. But it's this is a limitation in and of itself for what we really are, I think, which is this expanded infinite connection.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And that, even the way you say that, like, this is your earth suit, this is your limited avatar that you are inhabiting now, but your soul will go on and do something beyond this. That's like having that personal relationship with God that actually, even if it were all, here's the crazy thing about it. It could all be bullocks and fiction and like we're totally making it all up, but that even having that belief will cause you to act in ways that you are seeking to add value to the lives of others, not just to yourself. And that, again, is back to the whole imitation of Christ. It's like, that's what you want. We want a world where we're all, it doesn't mean not having self-interest. Like, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So go and take care of yourself and pursue your aims and all this, but don't do it at the expense of others.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And my wife taught me something many years ago in terms of how to think about this that I think is really, really good, which is money. Money is such a hot topic for people, right? Like, I want to get more of it, or I don't have enough of it. Like, it's this it's a material possession, it's a material resource that there's so much of an emotional status with, right? And I went through like this big spiritual awakening earlier in life, and I remember talking to her one day, and it was one of those situations where you look at it and there's these people like Buddha or like Jesus that gave up everything to go on this spiritual path. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where it's like, if I go after this material path, am I not being as much like them as maybe I would like to be? Yeah. And what she told me one day, and this is more, I think, from her upbringing. So her family's from northern India, and they take a much more approach of like energy within the universe, the laws of karma, what you put out comes back to you, kind of Hinduistic philosophy, Buddhistic philosophy. And one of the things she told me one time I thought was so fascinating that really stuck with me is, Brian, money is energy. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a good or bad relationship with energy? Because just because you want to work hard and create this resource for you doesn't mean you have to stray further from this side as well. Sure. It's not one or the other, but it's literally just energy. So you can have a good relationship with this energy, or you can have a bad relationship, or you can walk the middle path, which is what my mother-in-law taught me, which I think is a very interesting way to think about it. Is you can still do well and have these things, and you can still practice these things over here and just walk the middle path, and you can have the best of both worlds. Don't let one pull you so far in the direction where it makes you feel guilty for not doing this, or this side makes you feel guilty for not getting this. Right.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Again, in the Bible, right? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. People often reduce that to money is the root of all evil, which they really mess it up then. But no, it's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So if you love, I would say love is something we should reserve for humans. So yeah, if you're loving material goods, and again, even the word love, we've sort of muddied because, the ancient Greeks had different terms for it. Eros, philia, agape. In the Bible, it's typically agape, like that unconditional love that a parent has for their child. They're saying that's the word love that's invoked in for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Don't have this unconditional love for material reality, obviously, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself and love God above all, but don't love material goods. When you misapply, I guess, that openness of love or agape, and you don't apply it to people and you apply it to goods, well then, yeah, of course you become a twisted person because then you're going to pursue goods at the expense of other people. And that's what a central bank is doing. That's what the state is doing. That's what
out of balance.
That's what evil is, basically, right? Anyways, yeah, no, that's excellent. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-sig vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which that have unilateral control over your assets. More than just security, OnRamp simplifies inheritance and estate planning, ensuring your Bitcoin wealth moves seamlessly to your loved ones without the risk and complexities of self-custody. Easily designate beneficiaries right in the OnRamp dashboard, eliminating the need for unreliable treasure maps or other complex key-sharing schemes. You can also avoid the probate process and ensure your heirs receive their Bitcoin securely with legal title transfers designed to keep your wealth intact for generations. As Bitcoin continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly access financial services, from inheritance and insurance to trading, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security. And importantly, the onboarding process is fast and frictionless. I set up my own OnRamp account, and it was far easier than dealing with hardware wallets or traditional self-custody setups. The team walked me through everything step by step, making sure I had a secure, reliant setup for my Bitcoin wealth. Secure your generational wealth with confidence. Schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team today at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. As one of my business mentors once told me, the job of the boss is to eliminate confusion. The best antidote for confusion is access to truth, which brings clarity to business decision-making and thus optimizes the drive toward future business goals. Over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP system, which brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make decisions quickly and effectively. If I was still a CFO, NetSuite is undoubtedly the ERP system I would use in my business. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, you can download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/whatismoney. This guide is packed with useful insights and is free for you at netsuite.com/whatismoney. Again, that's netsuite.com/whatismoney. Ancient Egypt. You've mentioned a few times before we got going today that you have a deep connection with this place. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I can't really explain it, but I'll just tell you the history on it because it's fascinating even to me still to this day. So ever since I've been very young, I've had this incredibly deep connection and interest specifically to ancient Egypt. And when I was young and I was in school, my parents would go to like parent-teacher conferences, and the teachers would be like, "Are you showing Brian things on like the pyramids or the Sphinx or anything about Egypt?" And they'd be like, "No." And they're like, "Well, look at his artwork." And I'd have like pyramids drawn and Sphinx. And like, I was just infinitely fascinated by it. And as I got older, every like movie I could watch on it, I would. Every book I read on it, I could. And I just continued to become more fascinated. And as I got older too, I had the weirdest synchronicities that would happen to me around ancient Egypt. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'll be at a restaurant, my wife and I'll go sit down and eat, and they will sit us in a section where there's like a King Tut photo right here. Like, or I'll be talking to somebody, like telling them about this weird connection to ancient Egypt, and Egyptian music will start playing. And one of the weirdest ones is that my wife and I, at the time we were just dating, and this was probably 2017, I want to say, we went to Egypt. It was the first time I actually got a chance to go there in person. And it was funny, as I was growing up, my parents would always be like, where do you want to go to vacation this year? And I'd be like, Egypt. And like, we're thinking Florida or something, you know? And so it was the first time I had a chance to go in person. And we're in the Starbucks in the St. Louis airport before we take our flight to go over there. And as we ordered a coffee, we're standing there, and a man and woman come up, and they're probably in their mid-50s. And I overheard them talking. They just got back from Cairo. Out of like all the places in the world in the St. Louis airport, this man and woman just got back from Cairo. So I struck up a conversation to him, and I was like, hey, we're about to leave to go to Cairo. And then we have a conversation. And then this gentleman sitting right to our right, who's probably in his late 70s, early 80s, stands up and goes, excuse me, did you just say you're about to go to Cairo? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I'm from Cairo. My name is Ramses. Like, you can't make that stuff up, right? Like, and my wife's sitting there and she's like, you know, what's going on, right? Because she knows this happens to me all the time, right? Yeah. And I, even from a young age, I've always had these incredibly vivid dreams of ancient Egypt. Of like me just rolling around in ancient Egypt, just like looking at pyramids, and like, and still to this day, every couple months, I'll have a super vivid dream that I'm rolling around in ancient Egypt. Just like walking around in like the very, very ancient royal times, right? And could never explain it. And then I went there in 2017, and I remember getting off. It's a long travel from the States. I think mine was like, took us like 3 different flights to get there. And I remember getting off the plane and walking outside for the first time and telling my wife, I was like, I don't know what it is, but I've never felt this calm in my whole life. I was like, I've 100% been here before. Not in this lifetime, but I've been here before. And everything was so familiar. Like I just could feel the familiarity with it. And so I've just had this crazy deep connection with it. And I mean, still to this day, I still have the dreams. I still have the synchronicities that happen to me all the time. And it's always Egypt. Like every time it's Egypt. And I've been doing more work in business development in the Middle East. And there's lots of people from Egypt over there as well. So I'll meet a lot of interesting people from Egypt. But when I went there, another interesting thing that happened is we had signed up to do a trip throughout Egypt. And it was, we started in Cairo, and then we flew north to a city called Abu Simbel and Aswan, and we kind of did this little Nile cruise where we got the opportunity to jump off at all these cities and see the ancient ruins and temples and pyramids in different areas as we hit these different cities along the Nile. Well, when we show up, I thought there was going to be like 10, 15 people from around the world in our tour group, and we get to the tour guide, and he's like, yeah, nobody else, everyone's canceled. It's just you two. And we're like, for the whole week? And it's like, yeah. I'm your tour guide for the whole week. I was like, okay, awesome. Wow. So we got to have like very interesting, in-depth conversations with him, because this particular guy was in Egypt, over in Cairo University. There's a degree, I believe it's called Egyptology. And it's where you study all ancient Egypt, and then a lot of these people become tour guides for the tourism industry over there. And so I got to ask him like very in-depth questions about my curiosity for Egypt over these many years, and get very specific answers and thoughtful responses, and got to spend the whole week with this guy. And it was just remarkable. And I remember going from city to city within Egypt and seeing these things, and just the whole time feeling like, this is so familiar to me. Like, I know I've seen this stuff before. And you see some of these hieroglyphs, and like, first and foremost, when you go to the pyramids and you stand and you look at it, there is no picture, movie, illustration that can prepare you for that feeling of what it is, because it's so big. Like, there's nothing that can really do it justice for how massive it is. When you see the size of even just one stone at the base of the pyramid, you're like, this is a remarkable marvel of human engineering, however this was created. And I remember asking the tour guide, I was like, okay, you've been studying this for 40 years. You grew up in Cairo. What's your opinion? And he goes, my belief is I know for sure it did not occur how we're taught in our history books. Because when you look at the terrain around the desert where the pyramids were built, it's not like smooth terrain. It's like sand and jagged rocks in certain areas. So to think that, I think the history books tell us that slaves pulled these giant stones through the desert to then assemble them as they built it over time.
Over logs, or like, what was the...
That's one of the theories that happened over logs. There's a variety of different things that people have played out over time, but none of them really make sense. When you really sit there and look at it, and you have one stone that is, I mean, there's like 2 million stones or something approximately at the pyramid. And one stone is so big, it's like inconceivable when you see it in person, how big it is and how much it weighs. And so I asked him, I'm like, what is your opinion? Like, how did this happen? And he goes, the only 2 theories that I've come up with over many years of studying this is it was a knowledge or a species from not this planet that either came and assisted or helped share that knowledge so they could do it themselves, or they were so much more advanced than what we are today, and that knowledge was lost or suppressed over time. And I've read a lot of it. I mean, there's the ancient alien theory, right? That somebody came down and assisted. Another interesting theory I've heard before is around sound harmonics.
Yeah.
And what the sound harmonics is that basically they could have had these devices that would cast a sound wave in a way that it cancels the mass around an object.
Yeah.
And then they would be able to pick it up, move it in place, and drop it.
Right.
Well, another interesting thing, if you don't know if you heard of the Coral Castle before. So the Coral Castle is located in Miami. It's actually in Homestead, Florida. There was a guy named Edward Lee Scanlon who in the early 1900s, he was in love with this girl. She wouldn't marry him. He was from Latvia, was the country he's from. This guy was about 5 feet tall and weighed 98 pounds. So very small guy. He was heartbroken over this girl, and he moved to the United States, and he moved to Florida. And he goes, I'm going to build this castle in memory of this woman that I was in love with that just wouldn't marry me. And so in a little bit north of Miami, he started building this coral castle. And what he figured out, allegedly, when you study it, is he believes he figured out how the Egyptians built the pyramids. Because the coral castle is these massive chunks of coral that he put in positions that are so perfectly weighted, and he built it by himself in the middle of the night with nobody around. And he started actually building it. And to give you some context, like he has a door that weighs probably 30 tons that a 2-year-old could push open. It's so perfectly weighted. Okay. And so he figured out something truly unique. And he started to build it a little bit north of Homestead and of Miami. And people were trying to figure out what he was doing. So they were like peeking at night, like, what's going on? And allegedly what occurred is that he wanted total privacy because he didn't want anybody to figure out what he had figured out. And the reasoning, I believe on his deathbed, that he didn't tell anybody is he said, what I figured out is so powerful that if it gets into the wrong hands, it'll create like a huge destruction, like a cataclysmic event on the human race. And so it's time manipulating energy, manipulating gravity, something that he figured out. So what he ultimately did was he calls this company and he said, I want you to come drop off a flatbed truck. I want you to leave. I'm going to load the truck up with coral. You can come back the next morning. We're going to drive it down to this new plot of land I bought in Homestead, Florida, and then I'm going to finish my project in seclusion so no one can see what I'm doing. So the truck went and actually drove up to pick up the coral and to drop the truck off so he could load the coral. He actually didn't want the people there. So they dropped off the 18-wheeler flatbed. They got in the other car and they left. And about 45 minutes to an hour after them leaving, there was a guy who discovered that he left his wallet in the flatbed. So they turned around and went back to the flatbed truck. So in total, they were gone for about 2 hours. They get back and all the coral is loaded on the truck. And these guys are like, what? Like, how did you do this? And he's like, don't worry about it. Just drive the truck to where it's supposed to go. Drove it up, unloaded it. He built the coral castle. I mean, the coral castle is a smaller compound. It's nothing at the scale the Egyptians did, but some of the pieces of coral are huge. And there's all documentaries about this on the History Channel and books you can read. And this guy was like 5 foot tall, just under 100 pounds, did it all by himself. And he claims that he figured out the way that the Egyptians built the pyramids, but he never told anybody about it because he did this whole thing by himself. And so you see stuff like that, and then maybe they had figured out a way to cancel mass around an object. Maybe they figured out a way to manipulate gravity whereby they could pick something up and move it into place. But it's fascinating regardless. Wow. And when you go through Egypt, you really see that this race of people was so much more advanced than we give them credit for. And like I remember there was a specific hieroglyph I saw in a temple, and I want to say it was Karnak temple, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And the hieroglyph was like a man and then a sperm and then a woman and then like a genetic DNA double helix strand. And this is like thousands of years ago. Yeah. And you're like, it's basically describing a story of a man impregnating a woman and creating life. It's basically like what it is. And it's like, how in the world would you have known that? And it's not like a big, well-known thing. The guy like had to pull me and show it to me in this tiny corner of a dark temple. And he's like, check this out. Wow. And I looked at it and I was like, that's remarkable, right? Like that's crazy that how would they have pulled that data, right? Pulled that information to know. They didn't have microscopes back then to our knowledge. And so it's just a very powerful place. And I've had this crazy deep connection to it. I don't know where my story is going to take me with that over time. And I can't even explain why it happens to me today, but I've gone to past life readers before.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I would go to these people just to see if they're like legit or not, I would always call them from a different number. I wouldn't give them my name. And I've been to one or two that like immediately, instantly, without me saying anything, when they started doing the reading, were like Atlantis and Egypt. Like right off the bat, they're like, you are an incredibly old soul. You were involved. Here's an interesting story. So one of them pulled out and said, you actually were in Atlantis. Atlantis was a real place at one time. They abused the energetic principles of how Earth works, our natural laws. And because they abused it, it created a cataclysmic event that sent them under the ocean. But the people that survived left to build Egypt.
Wow.
That was how this person basically described it, okay? And she said, I'm pulling this life from you from, thousands and thousands of years ago, Atlantis was here. And in this life, you were responsible for like orchestrating this group of engineers to create this new technology where you were basically crafting consciousness, integrating it with a craft that allowed you to travel. So like taking consciousness to move yourself around was like this brilliant technology that you were responsible for creating with this smart group of engineers. She goes, what I'm getting and what I'm pulling on is consciousness and tech, like consciousness and technology. Literally the week before that, I had finished authoring my third book that was not released to the public. Nobody had even seen it yet. And the title of the book is Consciousness and Tech. Okay. So, I mean, I was like getting goosebumps. My wife's sitting in the room and she's like, what's going on? This is great. Like this person's legit, right? So it's interesting. But I had this deep connection to Egypt through that. I can't really explain it, but we'll see where the journey goes.
Wow. That's amazing. So I've never even heard of the Coral Castle. Is that something that people can tour?
Yeah, it's a tourism attraction now. Yeah, it's probably like 20 minutes from here. It's not that far away.
Wow. And no one knows how he did it.
Yeah, he never gave away or disclosed it. From my research on it, he had this like mathematical equation above his deathbed when he passed away. And it was like a decimal string of characters and then like a division sign and another decimal string of characters. And it said like the secret to the universe. But he never explained what it was. And in terms of the tools he used to actually create it, they're actually on display at the Coral Castle exhibit. Yeah. You're talking about incredibly primitive tools, like very, very primitive tools. He wasn't using like a normal hammer. Yeah. It was like wood with a rock and some rope tied around it, like just very basic stuff.
Wow.
And he used that to basically build this and put everything in place. And one of the things he has as part of the Coral Castle is a series of 4 planets. I forget which planets, like Jupiter and Mars and something else. But there's an astrological significance to that built into what he created. But it's fascinating. Yeah, really fascinating.
So then I guess the theory would be something like people are levitating these stones with sound?
Potentially. Yeah, that's the sound harmonics theory that I've researched is that there was some kind of device that allowed you to basically cast a sound wave or a sound frequency that then canceled the mass around an object, allowing you to like pick it up and move it in place as if it was as light as a feather and then drop it perfectly in place. And then you quit casting the sound wave off and it just falls into place and it's like heavy again.
That is magic.
That's one potential theory. Yeah. There's lots of different ones, but that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Wow. That is fascinating. Have you been back to Egypt since?
No, I need to go back. It's funny because some of my international travels have gotten me pretty close where I'm just like a 2-hour flight away.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a chance to go back yet, but I definitely will.
Awesome. All right, how long were you there the first time?
I was there for like 10 days.
10 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So hit all the major cities. There's Abu Simbel, which is like Ramses' original tomb. There's Aswan, which is a beautiful area. Karnak, Luxor. There's Valley of the Kings.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because all the kings are buried there, but they actually pulled them from other areas of Egypt to bury them there.
And did you propose to your wife there?
I did actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So I proposed to her in front of the pyramids and the Sphinx, and it was a very memorable experience because for me it was like, oh wow, like this is. Now I like feel calm here. This seems like this place that I have this crazy origination story from like an astral and spiritual perspective for me. And so I proposed to her in front of the pyramids and yeah.
That's so cool. I wish I had a connection to a place like that. What are there certain books or movies about, I mean, you've studied probably a lot about ancient Egypt. Are there certain ones you would point people towards that you found especially good or useful? I
like Graham Hancock. If you found he's been on some of the ancient alien stuff, but he also has a little bit of a different view on stuff. He's incredibly knowledgeable about Egypt. I think he's a really good person to look into. Specific to movies, it's just been like History Channel documentaries and things like that. There's a couple ones I would say, and I forget the name off the top of my head, that are just like very specific on the pyramids, and there's interesting theories there. The ones I've always found more fascinating is I've watched those, but I kind of like it more where they talk about Egypt on a macro scale. So like, the pyramids is just one technological innovation, but there's way other interesting things that happen there that just aren't talked about as much. I also like how like different pharaohs over time initiated like different constructs in society. So one that I'm super fascinated in specifically is Pharaoh Akhenaten. His wife was Nefertiti. People are very familiar with that. So Pharaoh Akhenaten, before he came into power, was actually, people worship multiple deities in Egyptian religious structures. And when he came into power, he basically said, no, there is not multiple gods or multiple deities. Everything is one. Like we were talking about this before. Yeah. Everything is one. Everything's connected. So he changed the religious construct during his reign of power in Egypt and basically went to being worshiping one deity, right? Instead of all these different gods. And that was really fascinating to me because like what he kind of did was in alignment with how I think. Yeah. And it's also rumored that it's potential that Pharaoh Akhenaten and Moses were the same person. There's theories around that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I read some interesting articles and pieces that, you know, they have a very similar birth story and what happened to them over time. And, you know, think about what Moses did, right? What did he do when he came down and, you know, you're worshiping the golden calf and all these things you shouldn't be. And then kind of creating that more singular structure for how things should potentially operate.
Wow. Fascinating. It's so much there. Yeah. And Egypt is, I mean, the most ancient civilization according to the mainstream narrative, right? So it's like there's a lot that has come from that place. What about the alignment? Aren't the pyramids are aligned perfectly to magnetic north or something like that?
Perfectly aligned to magnetic north. Also, when you break down, I forget it's like the latitude or the longitude, it's like perfectly pi. Like 3.14, something like that, I believe. Like there's some type of very specific mathematical alignment and mathematical way that they fall together. Yeah. And it's a remarkable feat of engineering. Just like seeing it is one thing, but when you actually start to understand all the things that are built into it. Yeah. And there's a lot of like sacred geometry. I'm not sure if you're familiar with sacred geometry, but basically these geometric patterns that can fall within our reality structure that we have. And one component of sacred geometry that's very popular is called the ancient flower of life. Okay. And it's basically this, kind of looks like this lotus flower.
It's a fractal, right?
Yeah, it's a fractal pattern. Yeah. And the ancient flower of life is actually abundant in different inscriptions and hieroglyphics throughout ancient Egypt.
Wow. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is Coinbits, BITS.app/breedlove. You've brought up past lives, like you had past life reading and whatnot. What are your views on that? Is this individual soul to soul reincarnation? Like you're in this life, then you die, and then you come back as someone else? Is this something that's more diffuse? Like what are your views on how that actually works?
So I'll preface it to say, I really don't know.
Sure.
But my thesis with it, as I've learned over time, is there's a couple different ways to potentially look at it. One, if you're following a view of just traditional reincarnation, it's basically that you incarnate into this earth suit for a period of life school on Earth, right? You go through these lessons. Hopefully you evolve your state of conscious awareness, and over time you hopefully end as a better person than when you started and you went through these lessons, right? And then you incarnate into another life and you do it again. So that's one way to look at it. And an interesting thing one of my friends told me one time is, think about incarnations, if you follow that line of thinking, as a cosmic clock. So what if, for example, you've been here for 1 million incarnations and I've been here for 50,000 incarnations. On that cosmic clock, you may be at 4 p.m., but I'm only at 2:15 p.m., right? So you've had more incarnations than me. Not good or a bad thing. It just means that you've been around the block maybe spiritually more than I have in that example. So that was a really interesting way to look at it. If you think about incarnations as this cosmic clock, because what happens if you're in a family and all of a sudden you feel very out of place or maybe advanced spiritually, and then maybe your parent is at a very different level. That cosmic clock always made sense to me. It's like, okay, maybe I happen to be at 6 p.m. and the parent happens to be at 3 p.m.
Right.
And this could apply, I'm sure, to a lot of different scenarios, right? Friends in your life, business associates in your life. Maybe it's that everybody goes through, and maybe there's this pool of like spirits like, yes, we want to go to Earth and go through this Earth school. And I actually had a very interesting dream one time that aligned with this. And in my dream, I passed away in my dream, and my soul got like launched out of my body after I passed away. And I landed on this planet, and there was this massive neon sign in the dream that said launch pad and landing pad. And when I landed, I started walking around. And to me, like the way I interpreted it was almost like a big music festival. It's kind of like where, like that's the vibe when I landed. And as I was walking through, all these people were walking up to me and they're like, welcome back. It's so good to see you. It's been a little while. How did it go? And I'm like, what? Like, I didn't remember anybody. And they're like, just give it a little bit. Your memory will come back. You'll remember it. And I was like, okay. And then I kind of walked around and was meeting people, and everybody remembered me and knew who I was, but I didn't know who any of these people were. And they explained it to me. They're like, it takes a little bit of time for your astral memory to recalculate and calibrate once you come back here. I was like, what is here? Where am I? And they go, the sign says like launch pad and landing pad. That's the way that people that understand it. But basically, this is where you go before you choose your next incarnation on your next planet, before you go through another series of lessons. And then in the dream, this person in front of me goes, look, here's an example. And they pulled up like this holographic thing of these different jewels. And they were different colors, like a yellow jewel, a green jewel, a red jewel. And they were flipping through them, and they're like, here's the green one. This is the earth jewel. This is what you just attained by having another incarnation on the earth. It was almost like a video game, right? As they were like flipping through these. And it was just remarkable to see like the visualization of that in a very different way that somebody else would look at and say, well, maybe that's heaven, and maybe that's angels talking to you, right? Like the way that my mind perceived it was very different. And I was like, well, so what do? We just hang out here? They go, yeah, you hang out until you choose your next incarnation, and then you go through a series of lessons. You plan your lessons before you get there. Your soul knows what lessons you're going to go through before you even incarnate into the body. You choose your family, you choose your relationships. These are like people that you will meet when you come back here. But you choose these people because they put you through lessons in life. And that's the whole point of all this. It's experiences and lessons. And in this dream, then I woke up, and I remember going and telling my wife about this, and she goes, do you remember like a month ago you had this dream, but you only remember like the first 10% of it? She's like, this one you remember the whole dream. So I didn't even remember telling her that. And it was a very interesting way that like personifies this concept of reincarnation when you think about it. And I don't know if I'm just programmed that because of how I think in my worldview, or if there's more to it. Right?
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the whole line between living and non-living being so hard to define. And, you know, if it is all alive, then presumably when you die, then whatever the spirit or soul is that inhabits us, it's going to do something else, right? I don't know. Language kind of falls apart when you get into all this stuff, but it's cool to the dreams. The dreams seem to be something, right? They're like a message from that domain to some extent.
And the thing about dreams is that, so in the brain, we talked about the pineal gland earlier. The pineal gland secretes dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT.
Yeah.
So from my research, when you're born, the brain has a huge influx of dimethyltryptamine. When you die, it has an influx of dimethyltryptamine. And when you have super vivid dreams, it's secreting tiny amounts of DMT out. And it would make sense if that is this connection to the astral world, because you're getting inserted into an earth suit from the astral world. When you're having these vivid dreams, you're kind of connecting with what could be the astral world. And then when you leave, you're exiting. When you pass away, you're exiting this world back into the astral world. And so it's an interesting concept when you think about how the brain secretes dimethyltryptamine and the way that it does it at different points of your life.
Yeah, and then that would make sense. It's almost the reason why we have to sleep probably is to plug back in to like recharge, basically, right? To recharge with that astral energy or whatever it may be. This whole discussion around reincarnation, past lives, energy, and stuff, it starts to go into kind of the astrological domain. You had this quote that you cited in here that, this is JP Morgan, millionaires don't use astrology, but billionaires do. So besides being the oldest science, I mean, today people joke like it's complete bullshit, right? They'll say, oh, such and such is, astrology is more serious than such and such to speak defamatory about something, right? What are your views on astrology? What is astrology and how does it relate to these other ideas?
I view astrology as like a very valuable tool if you choose to like understand it and figure out ways to leverage it. My wife, I noted before, her family's from northern India. So it's very common in India, like they're big into astrology, right? And for major life decisions, some of them even have like influential astrologers that their families have gone to for generations and generations, and the astrologer has passed the art and science down to people for generations and generations. So when we were getting married, my mother-in-law went to India and met with their family astrologer that they've used for many, many, many years. And he basically develops what's called a birth chart for you. So what you provide to him is like your time of birth, the geological, or the coordinates, the latitude and longitude of where you're born at. And then he basically measures what the planetary alignment was at that point in time. And then I had never had this done before from an astrologer, so that was very interesting. So then she comes home and there is like a 40-page document written in ancient Sanskrit.
Wow.
Well, my mother-in-law reads Sanskrit. She had like a master's in Sanskrit, so she can still read the language and translate it. And so she sat there and translated this whole document. So I had one done, my wife had one done. And what it basically lays out is the beginning of it is all these mathematical equations and planetary alignments with these like charts and graphs that are in there that are very scientific. And then you create content around it. And basically it's like these different segments of what's going to happen in your life. And then they break them down by timelines. Okay. So when I received it, this person had never met me, right? And then it's broken down by like, these things are going to happen over this period of years. It's very specific. It's like July 19th, 2022 to April 14th, 2024. These kinds of things are going to occur in your life. And they'll tell you whether it's good or whether it's bad. They're like, this is what's going to happen. And I'll tell you, remarkable accuracy with what's happened in my life and what this person predicted that got played out. So there's something to it. And yeah, JP Morgan had this famous quote from many, many years ago. And his quote was that millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. And what's interesting is people that I've had the good fortune to have relationships with that I've seen that are very, very successful in life, a good percentage of them are very open to some of these universal topics that we've talked about. And they've noted that like we have this internal GPS that kind of our GPS knows where we're already going in life. And are you going to be awake to it? Are you going to be aware to it? And are you going to allow it to guide you? And so there's definitely something to it. And I think astrology plays into that as well as a potential factor for people that are open to it. Yeah.
I mean, again, like they say, it's the oldest science. There's the idea of the Lindy effect, right? Where if the older a technology is, the longer its life expectancy is expected to be, right? And so the fact that astrology has survived this long is a pretty strong indication that there's something to it. It's probably been trivialized a lot where, people I remember when I was a kid, people would read newspapers with their little astrology prediction in the column. Like maybe that's probably not the best reading. You probably need something more sophisticated like what you did. The other thing that made sense to me is that since all the heavier elements are actually manufactured in the hearts of stars, and then the stars explode and they sort of seed the universe with the materials that organic life is made of, or organic chemistry rather is made of, obviously we have a connection. Like we are made of stardust. So it would stand to reason that we are somehow connected to the rhythms or the music of the spheres, so to speak. And yeah, it doesn't fit well into sort of modern empirical science, but again, it's very ancient and it's stood the test of time. So maybe there's something in there that we've kind of lost touch with in our modern scientific paradigm.
Something that you noted, that something I ponder sometimes, I think is really fascinating, is you said we're from stardust, right? Yeah. So the human eye is incredibly unique, right? There's supposedly no two human eyes that are identically the same. And one thing I always thought was fascinating is, based on what you just said with your theory, what if the eye itself, like everybody's eye is slightly different, there's a slightly different colorization of it. What if like the eye was the gateway to understand where that person's soul potentially came from the vastness of the universe? Like what if there was a galaxy that looked like the color spectrum of the person's eye for which their soul came from at the time? That's a little more far out there and esoteric, but there's actually a very interesting movie. I think it's called Eye Origins. And what the concept of the film is that this man fell in love with this woman, and she had this, and what he did was he studied people's eyes. So he was constantly doing photography on people's eyes. He was studying them from a scientific perspective because no two eyes were the same. And he was with this woman and fell in love with her, and she passes away like right in front of him in a very like hard way to watch somebody go. And he broke down. It completely changed his life. And then because of studying eyes, somebody told him, it's like, do you believe in reincarnation? And he's like, no, I'm a scientist. That doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. Well, in this computer, there's a global computer system that can actually measure when people's eyes are scanned and put into it. So you can search all around the world. If any two eyes ever pop up, they're the same. It like never happens. Well, in the film, these two eyes popped up from his woman that he was in love with to this child that was in India. It's the identical eye. Okay. So he goes to India and spends like weeks trying to find this child, right? Yeah. It's if you've ever been to India before, it's not easy to find somebody you're looking for because there's a billion people over there. Yeah. And so he ends up finding this child, and the eyes are identical, and she remembers him, like in the film. She's like they like, you know, have this embrace. They start breaking down and they're crying, and he's at first he's like, when he first meets her, he's like, no, it's not the same. And then all of a sudden she walks down the hallway after their meeting, and she says something that his wife said, like the exact same words. And he turns around and he's like, and he says her name, and he runs and grabs her, and they both start crying and picks it up. She's like, this is her incarnated in this new person that has an identical eye spectrum, and this is who it is. And whether that happens or not, who knows? But the film is very interesting. Yeah, and it's something I've thought about quite at length.
Well, that's so cool. What's it called?
It's called Eye Origins, like eye and then origins.
Origins. Yeah. Wow. We'll have to check that out. So, ancient civilizations, advanced technology. I mean, what else do you think we've lost over time? Like we're talking about astrology. Like maybe this is a science, or I wouldn't call it a technology. And maybe it's a technology too, because as you're mentioning in India, I think they often use that for arranged marriages, right?
Typically arranged marriages, buying a home, like these types of things are used for a lot of different major life decisions. Yeah.
What else do you think we've maybe lost in the march towards scientific progress, post-enlightenment? We've lost connection with other ancient technologies, techniques, et cetera. What else do you think we've separated from?
I have an opinion that wouldn't say that we've lost this, but it's been intentionally suppressed. And what it's around is, I think our technology today of what we really have is light years more advanced than what the public knows about. And I mean like interstellar travel, Stargate transportation, things of that nature. Because there's a lot of stuff in ancient texts that talk about things like this. Like in ancient texts and even ancient like artifacts, there's devices that were created that like an artist made that literally look like a person in a space chute, like flying off into space, right? Yeah. And what if over time there was a group of people that realized how powerful this technology was, that if the whole world knew about it, that, you know, things would be a lot different. So maybe they suppressed it and they tried to control it. But like from an interstellar travel perspective, I would not be surprised if our government has something that is way more advanced than what we think. And I'll give you an example. So Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works is basically the advanced research and intelligence division for Lockheed Martin. Back in 1995, there was a guy who was a new engineer working at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. The CEO of the company at the time was a gentleman named Ben Rich. And he gave this presentation to all these new engineers that they were hiring at the company. And at the end of the presentation, this is in 95, there was a black craft whipping off into space. And he closed the presentation and said, "We now have the technology to take ET home." And this engineer went up to him afterwards and he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Rich, what do you mean by that? Like, we now have the technology to take ET home." And supposedly Ben Rich responds to him and says, "How does ESP work?" And he goes, "ESP?" He goes, "Extra sensory perception. How does it work?" And the engineer responds, he goes, "I didn't know what to say in the moment, so I just said the first thing that my brain could think of, which was all points in space and time are interconnected." And he goes, "Yes, that's how we're doing it. We're thinking and we're arriving. Wow. That's how the crafts are working." And this was in 95, right? And from an agency that basically, an organization that stands to benefit from having super advanced technology. Yeah. There's actually theories that a big chunk of some of the massive deficit that's created, which goes back to our monetary system, has been to fund these kind of technologies in black budget operative space-based programs that the public will never find out about, or if they will, it'll be many years into the future. And there's actually like a private fundraising mechanism whereby they can go into normal agencies and tax dollars and actually take some percentage of tax dollars and donate it towards these black budget projects, and it never has to be accounted for. Wow. Ever. And an example is Donald Rumsfeld years ago in the early 2000s was actually in front of a congressional hearing, and they were asking him, like, "There's this massive deficit. What's going on here?" And he basically just kept giving the political answer, like, "I don't have to answer that." I forget exactly what he said, but he wasn't answering the question, okay? And it was a big deal. And there was like a UFO disclosure thing happening around the time with Dr. Stephen Greer, which is a guy that's big. He created CSETI, the Center for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Okay. And he was working very hard to kind of disclose this massive information that one of the Rockefeller people in the family was actually assisting him. And he was like one of the good ones and was like, "You need to take this information and get it out in the public eye." And so he was working really hard on this disclosure project. And then the information around this massive amount of money that was unaccounted for with the US government that was allegedly going into these black budget projects was in front of a congressional hearing. And Donald Rumsfeld was like, "We're not going to talk about that," basically. I forget what his exact response was. The very next day, 9/11 happened and no one talked about it again. Wow. So it makes you think, it's like, okay, you know.
Was this the $1 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon's budget?
Wow. The $1 trillion the Pentagon couldn't account for and have never had an explanation as to where it went. Wow. So the theory is that a lot of it gets siphoned off into these black budget projects that then get contracted by military contractors like the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works or the Boeing Phantom Works that have these specialized divisions for advanced science and technology. And supposedly there's a lot of like super advanced space-based technology that's being worked on.
And then the collision on the Pentagon during 9/11 was that area that maintained the budget for that stuff too, right?
The Pentagon was one hit. Yeah. There's obviously the two planes that went into the Twin Towers, and then Building 7 that just fell miraculously with nothing hitting it down the block.
Which was also housing a bunch of accounting records too, I think.
For Enron. In the suit. And if you look back at who was one of the biggest contributors to that political campaign that ultimately won, Enron's executives.
So what do you think? I mean, what would be, so the motivation is to create these very advanced space-based space travel technologies and then just use them and not tell anyone about it? So like keep enslaving the global workforce to create more purchasing power to fund these things to go and do who knows what out in the cosmos?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's something that I have a very big interest in trying to figure out in this incarnation.
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated by it, and I've been so interested in it for so many years. So like my two big things I've studied my whole life has been ancient civilizations and like space. I found those two things super fascinating, and like these like fringe science that kind of goes in conjunction with those two things.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why there would be such a big cover up on that. But one of the things I've thought that ties back into religion is if people were fully aware that the universe was just teeming with life, like I believe it actually is, then would that change the control mechanism for religion? If people thought like there's all this different life out there, how would that change the religious construct and the ability to control people via religion? Or how would it change just our general social, like would people be running around crazy like, oh my gosh, there's aliens out there, right? There's advanced species. And when I look at space, I think of it, there's potentially people way more advanced than us. Yeah. There's potentially beings that are the same level of intelligence as us, and there's potentially beings that are far less intelligent than us. You know, because if you just think about space from just a statistic perspective, statistically it's so big. It's like why would it not just be teeming with life? Like we're the Milky Way, we're one small galaxy. How many billions and billions of stars there are? Come on. You know? No,
there's an equation for that too, right? Drake's equation maybe, where it's saying that, you know, even if the chance of life on a planet was 1 in a million, you'd still have like trillions of life bearing planets basically, because there's so many damn stars and planets and et cetera.
A good way to look at it is this: if even one of the UFO sightings that have happened in all of history was true, that shows life on other planets. You know, I mean, people today would argue, well, the military could be the ones that are actually doing the crafts, and that's possible. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure they've got very advanced technology in regard to that. Another interesting rabbit hole to go down is the Malaysian airline disappearance. So there's a gentleman, I believe his name's Adrian Forbes. He's like a citizen journalist that's looked very deep into this for many years. And he actually has footage that was released that shows that airline basically having these three things came up into the air, and this is on YouTube. You can watch this information. So these three like devices came up in the air, started spinning around the front of the airline, and then there was this bright flash in the sky, and it just disappeared out of thin air. And what he believes is that the U.S. government has very advanced technology and propulsion systems around being able to like create a black hole. Out of thin air and basically taking something into it. I don't know where it goes on the other side of the black hole, but he's been documenting this for years and years and years. And he actually developed this long congressional letter that he sent to Congress saying, I've got this evidence. I've been doing this for X amount of years. This is what I've uncovered. Allow me to come testify in front of Congress and show you what I've discovered. And it's remarkable what this guy's come up with.
Wow. It's always oscillate between government just being utterly incompetent when you just look at a lot of the things that they do, and then you hear these other, I guess we'd call them conspiracy theories, but that maybe they are harboring something that's super advanced that we just don't know about. Do you think they reverse engineered some of this from, you know, something like a Roswell event in the 50s or whatever?
I mean, I think, so my research on like LED lights was when that was first created, that was allegedly a reverse engineered from a craft that was, that crash landed. But, so Roswell is like the common touristy attraction. There's actually a location close to Roswell called S4. That was the military name for it. That's where supposedly a lot of the stuff was getting reverse engineered at one point in time. And from my research on it, there's people that would go in and have like very good credentials, right? Like these aren't just kooky people, like tinfoil hat type people. These are very smart engineers, very smart mathematicians, physicists, people that were brought in to basically work on this. And then years and years and years later in their life, they came out to talk about it. And I guess maybe there's a situation whereby if you work on that, you're like sworn to secrecy and you got to sign all these contracts with the military and the government contractors that say, if you ever talk about this, we're throwing you in jail, we're throwing your family in jail. Like you don't talk about it. So it scares people, I guess, a lot. That's why they're so quiet about it. But from my understanding is like, let's say there's a craft that's crashed and they have a team of people. And I say they, I mean the military contractors that are in the government that's working on this to reverse engineer it. What they do is they compartmentalize the knowledge of what's being attained.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have a group of engineers that are working on one section and they only get information to that one section, but they don't know what the other 8 sections of engineers are working on.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it only allows a couple people to know the full macro picture of what's happening on the reverse engineering. And it basically shields the rest of those individual groups from knowing the full picture.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure that's the way that would be run. So I wanted to go back to the pyramids here, because you had this the theory of how the pyramids may be an electromagnetic consciousness grid.
Yeah.
And the possibility that humans have like north and south poles in in their DNA strands.
Yeah.
That interact with the Earth's magnetic field. Can you tell me about that?
So yeah, of course. So through my research over time, one of the interesting theories is that the pyramids are basically set on a point of the Earth that has a very unique electromagnetic part of the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that like you feel different, a human being feels different based on the energy they're surrounded by, right? Like if you're around somebody that's negative all the time, usually your energy is going to change. You're going to be depressed. You may not feel good. Your outlook on life may not be great.
Yes.
But then when you surround yourself with people that are very positive, your energy shifts in that direction, right? So we are energetic beings. So there's theories that the pyramids themselves are built on these very specific points. And it's not just the Egyptian pyramids, it's pyramids all over the world. And they were built there for a reason based on how the magnetic field with Earth works at that particular point on the planet. And because the energy has such a fundamental change on the human's behavior, that maybe there is a consciousness grid that exists that like is this bubble around our planet, right? We're tapping into this consciousness grid, and that the pyramids themselves are these massive frequency emitters, whether that's an expansion of consciousness to the people that are here, or maybe it's something that expands messaging or consciousness from Earth out into the cosmos. Something like that.
Yeah.
So I've read into this before. I think it's a very interesting theory to think about, but there is miraculous things that's happened around the pyramids over time, and pyramids all around the world. Like, why is it that you could have a pyramid in Egypt that was constructed in a way that looks identical to something in Peru, right? Like when back then people allegedly had no way of meeting and traveling across the oceans to see each other.
Yeah, that's back to the Graham Hancock stuff, right? Where he's talking about is it the ground penetrating radar? No, it's laser. I forget LiDAR.
LiDAR.
Where they're seeing that there's pyramids beneath the jungle canopy in South America and whatnot. I've seen recently on social media. I don't know if this is true or not. There's allegedly pyramids in Antarctica, even.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? These are just ancient civilizations that are all over the world, and we've had these recurrent mass extinction events, or like what's
it could be. Yeah, that could be one theory. Another thing I find very fascinating, I want to say it's the North Pole, like the Antarctica region, is even the countries around the world that are constantly at war with each other, a lot of them have treaties not to touch Antarctica. Like, don't go touch that area. Like, why would that be? Why would you have all these civilizations around the world and there's like a treaties as to not go explore Antarctica or don't mess with it? I don't know what the reason for that is, right? Like maybe there's something that's very ancient there that we don't know about. So yeah, I can't answer that question, but I intend to find out.
Amazing. So this idea of enhancing our DNA, you've got a framework that relates to mental, physical, spiritual health. What is that? What does that mean?
I actually think that the more I've researched and learned about this, and I've treated myself like a science experiment for many, many years, from like exercise and nutrition and supplementation. Biohacking in a sense. I guess is probably what you would call it. And to test all different types of things of what I've worked well. And what I've learned over time, and especially as you get older, your endocrine system changes how your hormones function, right? Like your adrenal glands change, your testosterone or estrogen levels may change. And I think as that happens, it fundamentally changes your awareness from a consciousness perspective. And what I mean by that is if your hormones are out of balance, you could be tired, you could have brain fog, you could just not be feeling yourself. And then all of a sudden you're not connecting to God as much. You're not connecting to some of these spiritual components. So that goes back to one of the things I was saying earlier is what if there's an intentional effort to diminish the human faculty through ingredients in our food supply, stress is a huge one,
Right.
increasing cortisol levels, that then it actually creates a further disconnection between you and your intelligent source or God, whatever you believe in, right? And so over time, I think that hormones are very, very important, that I think most people don't pay enough attention to, because your hormones could be out of whack and it could be creating water retention or fat on your body and this and that. And you could be like, I'm working out and I'm eating healthy and this, but maybe you're so stressed that your cortisol levels are so high that you're just retaining water and fat and you're not processing those nutrients effectively. You're not, your workout's not working as well, even though you may be working out in a really good protocol and you're sleeping and getting your water and things like that, but your body isn't changing. You got to go look at your hormones because they make such a huge impact, right? And so I've noticed that for myself, that like I'll have, blood work done and my hormones checked, and I'm always working with doctors and specialists to try to figure out how I can become most optimal, because not only does it help you from like a strength and muscle mass and fat perspective and water retention perspective, but it actually changes your brain chemistry.
For sure.
Right? Like I know people that were super, super low. Their like men, that their testosterone levels were super low and they were like, just couldn't figure out what was going on with them. And then they started supplementing to rebalance those levels. And all of a sudden they are like a whole different person, like like they're more positive, because what happens is, in a man, as an example, and even with women, because women have testosterone, men have estrogen, right? Like you want them to be in balance. You don't want to have like massive amounts of testosterone. You want your hormones to be
the right
balanced.
ratio.
Exactly. And when you have that, you're a better version of yourself. You're more balanced. You're more clear in your mental capabilities. And I think you're also probably more connected to some of these things that we've talked through throughout the show. Yeah,
no, it's definitely the case. I did my test year over year, and most recently had like I guess I was 38. My free T was low, and then so we started supplementing. There's natural or normal testosterone, and then your free testosterone. So my natural or normal was fine, but my free, which is like the available testosterone, was low, and so started supplementing to get it up. And the main benefit that I noticed was like my work drive. It's like I had lost kind of this edge. Like I was feeling less motivated basically. And as soon as you got that ratio back in line, it's like, boom. It's a big, big deal.
So think about this. What you just said is you're more assertive, basically, is what I'm hearing you say. Like you become more assertive and it gives you your edge and drive back.
Yeah, assertive and just enthusiastic and motivated to work.
So testosterone levels globally are at an all-time low. Okay. If you're at the tippy top of the pyramid and you're trying to control a civilization of people, and men are generally the ones that would most likely revolt.
For sure.
What do you do to control them easier? You figure out avenues whereby you lower testosterone globally. Not only does it reduce population, which keeps a smaller amount of people to control, but it reduces your ability to have drive, reduces your ability to fight back, reduces your ability to be assertive with what you do every day. So that's why I'm such a big believer. Is like once your hormones are out of whack, your life is out of whack. Like you need to get that stuff dialed in, because you become a better version of yourself when you're balanced. And that's a perfect example.
Yes. Yeah. I've always said that the state is most afraid of critical thinking, a unified population, and a critical thinking, unified, armed population.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so, the testosterone component definitely plays into that. If you can just lower T, well, then they're not going to be that critical thinking. They might be armed, but they're not going to be very aggressive.
Docile.
Very docile. So just much more controllable. All right. Doing another like philosophical pivot here. Free will versus predetermination. This is, I find this to be utterly ridiculous. Like even when someone professes their belief that free will does not exist, I'm like, well, thank you for your freely expressed opinion. Thank you for proving the point of free will. It doesn't even get off the ground for me, but yet it's still such a thing that people wrestle with. So like, what are your views on free will versus predetermination?
This has changed over time. So, and I'll also preface this to say this is an evolving concept for me. So I used to believe 100% that free will is all that we have, right? Like nothing's really like the predetermination was not a strong argument for me at the time. Then as I've gone through life circumstances, my thesis has changed. And how it's changed is I've come to think that maybe at a macro scale, for the macro events that happen, the big fundamental events that happen in one's life, maybe that's predetermined. And like I noted before, maybe our soul chooses these events before we get here. And that's why it's predetermined for our life path and destinies, right?
Like they chose easy, medium, or difficult in the spiritual video game.
Yeah, exactly.
And
In a sense. And so maybe the macro big time events that are fundamentally life-changing for you, maybe those are predetermined. Maybe the micro events that lead you there, which could be a million different paths to get to the macro event, maybe those are more based on free will. And so like before we get here, let's just run out a hypothetical, right? So in my situation that I talked about earlier, I had all these different paths in life that got me to this macro event that occurred, which was the car accident we talked about. I didn't plan for that. I didn't out of free will say, oh, I'm going to go get in a car accident today and it's going to fundamentally change my life, put me on a path to go to law school, put me on a path to learn about Bitcoin and all these other things. Like that is a macro event that I had no free will in choosing, right? But to get there, there was maybe a million different paths that could have led me. And maybe it wasn't a car accident. Maybe it was something else that fundamentally redirected my life at that time. And then I've had other situations happen in life, right? And so when I look back at it, I think, oh, wow, I could have arrived at this destination tons of different ways. But the big thing that happened, there's only one way that could have happened. There's only one redirection that could have happened. So over time, my thought process has evolved that maybe we do plan out some of these things before we arrive. And like our soul's like, you're going to have these X, Y, and Z things happen. And they're going to be 3 or 4 times throughout your life where they're major events that fundamentally change who you are, that fundamentally redirect you towards your internal GPS of where your soul's already going. But the micro decisions that you make, those can be so abundant that the perception of the free will is there. Or maybe it is free will, right? Maybe we choose all these paths, but then the macro events are things that are set in stone before we came here because in this incarnation, it needed to happen for you to evolve to X point.
Interesting. Yeah. I where do I stand on it? I mean, I deeply believe that we control, you have the ability to choose basically, right? That like Viktor Frankl calls it the final human freedom, the ability to choose. You know, the gap between your circumstances and your response to them is something, it's an inalienable freedom. No one can take it from you. You can't even give it away, right? I can't give away my ability to choose, right? And no matter what the circumstances are, I choose how to respond, right? It emanates from within me. But I would say on the flip side, I also see there are times in life, what I would call is like God getting your attention. Like if you're off the path, right? Or there's something in you that doesn't feel right. You've been ignoring it for a while and you've been trying to rationalize why you're doing whatever the thing is that's off the path. At some point, you're going to get the slap, basically. Yeah. The macro event, as you might call it. But I don't find that to be incompatible with human freedom. I mean, maybe you could say it's like co-created, right? That, God has a plan, purpose, will for you. You're put here for a reason. There's a purpose to your existence. And if you deviate from that, the more you deviate from that, the more it creates this tension that will create that macro event. But you are still consciously choosing the deviation, or you're choosing to be on the path. I think, and again, when you get to these deep philosophical things, like language starts to fall apart a little bit. And typically the truth of the matter is like transcendent to it and somehow unifying of the opposites. So maybe both are true somehow. Because, Christian tradition will say something like God is omniscient, right? He knows everything that will happen, everything that will come. So from a God's eye view, it's all predestination for us, but we also have free will, right? Christ gave us freedom so that we may be free. So like, I hear you. And I think that,
so pull that thread a little bit further. Yeah. So my concept that I had too was, what if we pre-plan some of these macro events? Maybe the concept of the pre-planning is the free will in and of itself. You're choosing.
The soul chose.
Yeah, the soul chose. Yeah. So in our human reality, it may feel like we're choosing, but the soul actually chose before. But that is in and of itself, if that soul is what is in this incarnation, it was choosing.
That's interesting. Yeah. So the soul chose these milestone events, but then it puts itself in the spiritual video game of the meat suit or the earth suit or whatever it is. Then it gives autonomy to the earth suit to navigate from milestone to milestone. I mean,
it's a deep concept. It's a very deep concept to think about. But I also think it's fascinating that human beings, and to me, seem like the only species that thinks like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What am I doing? I think about animals. Animals are just they're just like in the moment, being here, experiencing it, right? But for some reason, we have these deep yearning questions. Most people do, I feel like, that even if they don't admit it, is, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Like these kind of we innately are wired to question these things as opposed to just being and going through the experience.
Yeah. We're definitely in search of meaning. Actually, that's Frankel's book title, right? Man's Search for Meaning. The version of predestination or lack of free will that I do not subscribe to is that materialist, which I used to subscribe to when I was younger and reductionist, that view that you can, if you had enough data about how everything was interconnected and interacting, you could just extrapolate forward all the rest of history. Just like we extrapolate, or what do? We rewind the clock to get to things like the Big Bang, right? So we look backwards. They say or certain reductionists will say, if you have enough data about the interactions between all these entities at the right micro scale and the right macro scale, that you could just fast forward basically and extrapolate all the rest of history. I don't buy into that at all. I think there's an irreducible complexity to reality. And maybe it's, the layers get so deep that we can't even perceive them, right? There's a concept in physics called the Planck scale, right? Which is like the distance. A photon has a wave. The distance between a photon's wavelength is like, we can't see things smaller than that because the photon is the means by which we see. So there are things that are just far beyond human perception or comprehension that I think influence this reality. And I would not subscribe to any human version of predestination, even though the soul thing is like, then you're talking about the transcendent
beyond
dimension. And now that, okay. And even then we're saying, oh, maybe that's just the freedom being expressed from a higher place. So anyways, I don't like the Sam Harris thing, and there's like, oh, there's no free will and it's all, billiard balls. I'm just like, how do you reconcile that with your own opinion right now in this moment? And someone else's, it's like, I can't get my head around that.
Yeah, so, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. You're a fit guy. Like, what do you do? Like, talked a lot about the spiritual world and all this. Like, what you mentioned you've done a lot of biohacking or self-experimentation. What is your health, physicality, fitness protocol? How do you take care of yourself today?
So it's evolved over time. What I found today that works really well for me is, as of right now, I usually weightlift 3 days a week and I box 3 days a week. So, and those are on alternating days. And from a weightlifting perspective, my whole life, I've been like the 3 to 4 sets per exercise and then move to the next exercise, right? So like on one day you'll do chest, and the next day you'll do biceps and triceps, and then you'll do legs, right? Like that kind of traditional bodybuilding split. And I've always been very much into exercise and fitness and kind of seeing what works best for me. As I've gotten older, one of the things I shifted to that seemed to work really, really well for me specifically is the principles that Dorian Yates implemented. So Dorian Yates was Mr. Olympia 4 or 5 times, and he had a very different philosophy of lifting than Arnold Schwarzenegger did, or a lot of other people. So Schwarzenegger was like volume training, right? Like you do 4 or 5 sets of something and you move to the next exercise. How Dorian Yates did his stuff, which was actually from the principles of Mike Mentzer, who was a bodybuilding before him, but the original principles were from the guy who founded Nautilus, the Nautilus Fitness Company. And what the principles are is that when you have a muscle group and you take the group during a set to absolute failure, you should be done. You should not keep doing sets after that. So what their protocol was you warm the body up first, and then when you actually start working out, let's use a bench press as an example. You do your first set at about 50 to 60% weight of what the working set's going to be. And you just do 6 to 8 reps just to get the range of motion down, right? Then for your working set, your goal is to get somewhere between 8 to 12 reps. So put a weight on where it's going to be heavy. It's going to make you challenge yourself. And if you get to 12 reps and you can do 13, do 13. If you can do 14 or 15, just keep going until you absolutely exhaust the muscle.
Training to failure.
Exactly. Go to absolute failure on that one set. And then when you're done with that exercise and go to incline and then do the same thing. And then we're done with incline, do flies and do the same thing. So instead of doing 16 sets across 4 or 5 exercises, you're basically doing 4 or 5 exercises with one working set with each of them. And when I changed over to that concept, it wasn't that long ago. It was probably like under 2 years ago. I had remarkable change in how my body responded. and how my muscles, ligaments, and tendons, like if you've been working out for many, many years, you've got aches and pains, right? Like you've got stuff that's hurting you. All of that went away for the most part. I get injured way less than I used to. The muscle mass actually on my exercises, like the weight and stuff, went up. And I'm also very intentional that when I work out and I do something, I am very slow with my reps, right? Like I'm not trying to do anything for speed. So like if I have something I can get 10 to 12 reps on and I have it, I'm doing like a 3 to 4 count down and then back up. And that really helps me exhaust the muscle as well. And so when I shifted to that, it was a huge change in terms of how workouts worked for me. And also you get things done in like 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Like you're not in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so that worked out super well. And then I reached a point where I was just getting like too strong, too big. And I was losing some of my mobility and my agility. And I used to box back in college. And so I wanted to kind of like get some of that agility back and more mobility and flexibility with things. So now I limit it to 3 days of lifting a week, 3 days with boxing. Some days I'll just do 2 days of boxing.
Yeah.
And then usually 1 day a week I'll do yin yoga.
Nice.
And I do yin yoga specifically because for me, yin requires you to hold a position for 3 to 5 minutes. And there's a old quote where it's like your issues live in your tissues.
Yeah,
and when you hold
true.
a position for 3 to 5 minutes, after like 90 seconds, you really feel it release,
Yeah.
right? And then when you get done with a 60 to 90 minute yin yoga session, you get up and you can just like feel your whole body realign itself, right? And I think it's because after working out as much as I do and sitting at a desk and being on a computer like we are in our lifestyle today, your fascia in your muscle tissue starts to mold a certain way.
Yeah.
And you need to actually reset it to get your body in the structure that it's naturally supposed to be. So that's worked out super, super well for
sure.
me. I'll do like a couple days a week, I'll do sauna. I've done cold plunges before, but it's not something I do religiously.
Yeah.
And something that actually made a world of difference for me probably about a year ago that I started doing is I'm the type of person where for many, many years, I was tracking like every exercise I did. I was tracking my reps. I was tracking what I ate because it helped me stay in like good shape, right? It was good for my mental and like remembering everything. And I reached a point where I was like, I've been doing this for so long that like even a workout to me, even though I love exercising, it was like triggering a cortisol response because I was like, oh, I got to go write my stuff down. I got to get this done, right? That's just how my brain works.
Yeah.
And I reached a point where I was like, at the end of the day, what does it matter? I'm doing this to better myself. Like I shouldn't be creating stress on myself just to do these things, right? Like it's supposed to be enjoyable. So I quit doing it. I quit tracking everything. And since I've done that, now I go in and I'm working out and like, I just know around what weight's going to work good for me. And if I do 60 pounds on a workout one week and 65 on the next week, great. Or 50 pounds on the, like, great. Who cares? But I've noticed since I've done that, like I can just feel less stressed like while I'm doing it. So it's made a world of difference just not tracking. Cause I feel like in today's age, we have so much data. And there's a lot of people that will track so many different things about their body. But what they're not realizing is maybe the very nature of tracking all these things is subconsciously creating a stress.
Right.
And that's cortisol, which messes up your hormones, right? So like imagine you go to sleep and you wake up and maybe normal, you'd be a little bit tired, but you're still going to go on and have a good day. But all of a sudden you check your sleep tracker and it's like, oh, you only got 67% quality sleep last night. That changes your mental capacity, right? It's like, oh, darn. Yeah. And maybe you become more tired than you normally would be if you wouldn't have checked it. And I know it's different for everybody. You know, sometimes it works really good.
It's like a reverse placebo or something.
Yeah, maybe it's a reverse placebo concept. And for me, that's kind of what was happening. So I just cut it all out. I don't wear any trackers. Yeah. I know what diet works well for me. From a diet standpoint, I tend to go pretty low carb during the day and I eat my carbohydrates in the evening. And that helps me keep a good balance of like the energy and kind of leanness with what I do, but still the carbohydrates help me from the, and when I eat super clean. So it's like a traditional, you know, high protein, healthy fat, things like that. And then the carbs are usually like rices and sweet potatoes and things like that, yams and Japanese potatoes. And I do that strategically at nighttime because one, it keeps my glycogen stores at a certain level where it still give me the energy that I want for working out the next day. And also carbohydrates have a cathartic effect to them. So they actually help you sleep. Yeah. And so I noticed I've done carnivore, I've done very low carb stuff before, and it works great for me for a couple weeks. And then all of a sudden I'll like wake up in the middle of the night and my heart's beating real quick. And I'm like, okay, there's an electrolyte imbalance or something going on. So I've noticed for me personally, if I do, you know, pretty low carb during the day or no carb during the day where I'm eating like vegetables and lean proteins and healthy fats, and then I implement the carbohydrate in the evening with my meals, that seemed to work out really good for me.
Yeah, it gives that signal of abundance to the body too that, I think just gives you that cathartic effect, like you said, helps you release and relax. And Yeah, the training, I used to, similar when I was getting into training, trying to be very regimented about workouts that I did. And, you know, you'd scale up the volume and then scale it down and pushing weights higher, weights lower.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think at some point, I just shift to instinct training. You know, you've got it so thoroughly integrated into your psychology and your bodily movement, that you start training on instinct instead. And that's very liberating, actually, because for me, you sort of develop a dialogue with your body at that point that I literally go to the gym. I'm like, okay, what's not sore today?
Mm-hmm.
And what exercises haven't I done in a while? And it's kind of fun, right? You get to build a custom workout every time. Granted, I wouldn't recommend that from the beginning. You need to go through the training
structure
for a while to like get all those downloads, basically. Then you can sort of, it's like learning to play the piano or something, right? You wouldn't just go jump on the piano and start freestyling, right? You need to go through this rigorous training for years and then you can freestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But training to failure, I've tried both ways. I was fortunate to adopt training to failure early on, like probably my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the only way to go, honestly.
And another thing I learned too through how I switched up my workouts, where I used to do a lot of volume, and now I do kind of the train to failure, where it's just the one set on something, is the science behind it. This was what was really fascinating for me, because I like to understand the science behind stuff when it comes to exercise and nutrition. So the science behind it was that when you do a set to failure, every additional set you do after that is you're basically digging a deeper recovery grave for the next week. And so if you've already exhausted the muscle till failure, anything you do on top of that is going to require more sleep, more nutrition to kind of get back to that homeostasis. And so that really clicked for me whenever I understood that. And since I've made the shift, it's made a world of difference for my particular protocol.
I think it's the best. Training to failure. And then what I also like to do is the supersets or trisets, where you're actually doing 2 or 3 exercises at a time. So you're rotating, you know, whatever, chest, buys, abs, for instance, a little rotation like that. And then making sure that you're moving from set to set every 20 to 30 seconds. You get like a cardiovascular metabolic training at the same time you're doing strength training. And I think if you do that seriously, you don't really need to do cardio that much. I mean, people are going to probably attack me for that one, but, it's worked for me. You get kind of a CrossFit style training, basically. And you don't need, not to say don't do cardio. Obviously, cardiovascular training is helpful. But if you're doing a bunch of kettlebell snatches, for instance, between your bench press and your curls or whatever the thing is, well, you're getting metabolic output at the same time you're doing the strength training. So you're kind of doing cardio strength training at the same time.
That's a great way to do it. I mean, because it helps you maintain the lean muscle mass or build it if you're trying to, but also stay lean while you're doing it, right?
Yes.
I also think something that's super important is food, obviously, right? Like the food that people consume, even like stuff you buy from Whole Foods, is not good.
Dude,
like you think it's good, you're buying organic, but it's really not. And you don't realize it until you go to a place that you can tell has like nutrient rich soil and you eat that produce or eat that stuff. And you're like, wow, this is how food should taste. And a great, like I see you're wearing the farm hat, like a great example is the farm at Okefenokee, right?
Yeah.
Like this is something that's in Folkston, Georgia. I've had a great chance to go and visit, and Jeff, the person that founded it, is a great friend of mine. And like you go there and you eat the food and you're like, wow, this is how a carrot's supposed to taste, right? It's like, it's remarkable. And then when you get a Whole Foods, you're like, okay, this is missing all the nutrients I'm supposed to get it. So unfortunately in the US, like you travel outside the US and you experience that more, where their food supply is significantly better than what we have here, even in things that we think we're getting that are healthy, that are just not. And so hopefully with the incoming administration, I know that's one of RFK Jr.'s big goals, is to clean up the food supply in the United States. I'm really hopeful he's able to do a good job and accomplish that.
Yeah, me too. No, it's an excellent point. Yeah, the food at the farm is really out of control. I mean, to go there and eat the everything they produce is like, that's one whole experience, is just totally mind blowing. But even when we just have people over at the house and we give them some of that olive oil or some of the honey, the honey is like, it's the most symphonic flavor I've ever tasted. It's the most complex. It's crazy. I don't even know how to describe it. I give people this honey and they're just like, huh, they like go into this trance.
It's good food, man.
And it's just really because they're just doing it the old fashioned way, right? Like there's no pesticides, all organic. And I guess the bees are happy, so they make really good honey, I suppose. But it's truly fantastic. I had a similar experience too. We've been doing these retreats in Mexico, and This is in Sayulita, Mexico, so just like an hour north of Puerto Vallarta.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the yams they have there, for instance, like we don't even have them in the United States. It's like a native heirloom variety or whatever, which is similar to what they have on the farms, all these varieties you can't even find in stores. I guess it's just natural to that region, and it's never had any pesticides sprayed on it. It's the way they've been growing it for thousands of years. Like you eat this thing and I don't even know how to describe it. It's like food you've never had before. It's like, oh, this is real food. And anything I've ever had at the grocery store is like half of this at best.
Another thing we've really lost touch with on this topic in the United States is eating stuff not in season.
Yeah,
and it's
that's
such
a big deal.
Basic thing.
Seasonal, local.
Yeah, seasonal and local. It's such a basic thing, but it's so forgotten. And it's like, oh, this type of carrot or this type of tomato, I'm just going to eat it 24/7, right? All around the clock.
Yeah.
But when that's not in season, to create that, it's being created in a way where it's not in season, right? Like, so there's some type of artificial process involved there, unless you're getting it, like certain fruits and vegetables grow in certain seasons for certain reasons in certain climates, right?
Yeah.
And so when you start to do that all the time and you're eating the same stuff all the time, you're actually harming your body because you're not going with your body's natural rhythm, how it should be consuming certain things at different points of the year.
Yeah. We're very attuned to the rhythms of the seasons and nature and whatnot. And something about eating seasonally and locally, like those foods, that whether it's the produce, even the meat, I think is also attuned to this similar, you're in the same frequency basically. So when you're eating these things that are local and seasonal, they digest better, they taste better, all the above. And so I guess in our attempt to overcome food scarcity, we industrialized everything and we did not encode for seasonal and local. And now that's pretty obvious, right? And then people are suffering with all kinds of metabolic issues as a result. But yeah, it seems, fortunately, the solution is sort of simple. It's like, just find really good, clean food that's around you right now and eat that.
I think we're going through this shift in global society right now where people are remembering that the simplest answer is the best answer. Occam's razor, right? Yeah. And going back to the basics is how things should be built, right? Like we've talked about Bitcoin. What's the back to the basics? It's a hard money monetary system. Yeah. We're doing it for thousands of years, right? Yeah. And then like we got off of it. We're out of balance. Our food supply, we had all this artificial agriculture that was created just to profit these companies that were literally poisoning people in the United States when you really break it down. What do? We get back to basics. Yeah. We go back to how the soil is supposed to be created. We go back to basic foods and healthy, natural whole things that you eat and just get rid of all the garbage. And it's such a simple thing, but it's so challenging because we're so ingrained. We've been programmed for so many years that this is okay for many, many, many decades. And now it's like, just go back to the basics. This is how things are supposed to be.
Yeah, no, it's wonderfully said. I saw this as Instagram reel or something the other day. Someone's like giving a Dorito to a raccoon.
I was like, what's this?
And the raccoon's sniffing it, and eventually just like leans back and like starts making this terrible face. And it's like, if the raccoon is not eating that Dorito, like you probably shouldn't be eating that Dorito.
Anytime you want to eat something bad, just remember the Dorito and the raccoon.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Engineering. You have this view that the world's being engineered towards greater and greater control. And we've already kind of alluded to this today. There's a lot of top-down influences. I think a lot of this has become pretty obvious to people over the past 4 years. Like going through the pandemic, hopefully opened a lot of people's eyes to this darker side of our current reality. What do you think is going to happen in our lifetimes? I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, obviously. There's also emergent technologies like the internet, Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, I guess, is somewhat ambivalent at this point, whether that's going to be a net benefit or a net detriment. But what do you see happening in, let's say, the rest of the century in this collision between the desire to engineer a controlled society and these technologies that are liberating society?
I think we're going to reach a point, fortunately, that is going to create a mechanism whereby the groups of people that I think are really controlling the world, I think it's about 100 families, full stop. like that probably control the agenda that gets played out because they're commercial beings and they have long progeny they've been trying to extend and interest they've been trying to extend for many, many generations, and they want the control to remain in place. I think we've reached a point in society via technology where it's creating a split in this universe. And what I don't know yet, and I'm interested to see how it plays out, is this split, not everyone's going to agree and adopt this new, let's call it chain, right? Like we're talking about Bitcoin. Say there's this new chain that's breaking off, right? There's going to be people that continue the traditional way. And there's going to probably be a universe of people that break off into this fork, this new chain that's created. And the ones that adopt this new chain are going to have optionality. And the optionality they're going to have is that people like the government that has for a long time like enslaved people in a lot of senses, right? Through debt and other mechanisms they put in place, they're going to have to come back to the bargaining table to the citizens and say, okay, you can go live in this other parallel reality, but we need to come back and start treating you like customers again, which is what you are. Right. Like we're this business that's supposed to provide value to you. What we've been doing for a long time is controlling you through the policies in place, through the military in place. So now we have to come back to the bargaining table and negotiate what is going to create a better society and economy for you, right? And I'm hopeful that's what's going to happen. I think there's a lot of technology that'll drive that change. And then the other parallel universe that if that happens at a big enough scale and becomes more adopted, that could just be the new reality, right? Like you can live on this old traditional structure, or you can work on this new structure. And from a systems perspective, when one system crumbles, another system always emerges, right? And I think we're going through the process of the emerging system that's crumbling the old system. And so I'm hopeful it creates an avenue whereby you don't have this massive control mechanism where you have this small group that really is calling the shots for the whole entire globe, right? Obviously, I believe there's this small group is going to fight tooth and nail, and we've already been seeing it, right? Like there's central bank digital currencies that want to get enacted for control and surveillance. There is just constant...
We just got a ban on those, didn't we?
We did. We just got a ban on those,
the CBDCs. That's good.
Another thing I think is that the psyops that happen through social media engines, right? Like there is intentional disinformation that's put out to bend someone's perception in a certain fashion to make them forget about what's maybe a true reality. And that's going to get worse in time. And so technology in and of itself is innate. It's how you use it, whether it's good or bad. So I think if we can take some of these new tools that are being developed and use them in a good fashion, there's a huge amount of potential for the future.
Yes. No, I'm very optimistic as well. I mean, specifically because of Bitcoin. That one is like, it's a unique one, right? Because I agree with you. The tool itself is sort of amoral, right? That I always say the hammer that can be used to build a house could also be used to bash a skull, right? It's the morality is in the wielder of the tool, not the tool itself. But Bitcoin's a strange one. Maybe money in general is a little bit strange because it's actually this incentive structure. And I think Bitcoin seems to be bending human action towards more positive relationships. So there's not a morality. I mean, I guess you could say there's kind of a morality encoded into it in a way, into the incentive structure. Because, I mean, in theory, I guess fiat is the opposite of that. I was going to say you could encode the opposite, but we kind of already have that. Fiat currency is this thing. It's like, oh, you can print money and you can wage endless wars and you can use it to fund, propaganda and psyops and all this stuff. You can totally socially engineer people and send them to war and, right? It's like the anti-Bitcoin. And so there, I don't know. I hesitate to call fiat, I mean, I guess it is immoral in a way. It's the immorality of the designer imprinted into the tool in a way. And it's different than just like a hammer or a knife because it's actually a material incentive system. It's not just a physical tool that you do a physical activity with, right? And so, yeah, I'm very optimistic.
It's like designed to devalue.
Yes.
From a moral standard, from a monetary standard, it's designed to devalue when you really think about it.
Yes, devalue is a great word. Debase is a great word. And it's debasing not just purchasing power, but like you're saying, like the morality. Who's done really good work on this is Hoppe. He wrote the book. He's written several books, but the one I'm referring to now is A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. Okay. He talks about in a world where private property can be easily violated, that's what people are going to do for a living, right? It's like, oh, if I can make money stealing shit, well, I'll just go steal shit. But in a world where private property is very difficult to violate, where there's good rule of law, there's sound money, there's something like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's like one of the hardest things to violate, hardest forms of private property to violate. Then you make theft less profitable, so people go and engage in productive activities instead. So it's that kind of tilting of the incentive landscape that makes me super optimistic about humanity's future. Pushes us to be more productive, pushes us to be less coercive, pushes energy prices lower. Energy is the number one input to all industrial processes. So that basically, as energy prices go down, aggregate wealth goes up pretty much. So I think we're headed the right direction, but what do they say? It's darkest before the dawn kind of thing. I don't know where we are on that sort of time horizon. What are your thoughts about this one? Has been very concerning, specifically over the past few years of the pandemic, censorship. I mean, it was just absolutely out of control. It seems like it's calmed down a little bit lately with the medical misinformation. We still actually had a couple of clips recently get taken down for medical misinformation.
Oh, really?
Still talking about, the jab and all that. It's like, the data is there. I don't know how it's medical misinformation. YouTube won't respond to you, right?
Yeah.
You're like, do you want to appeal? You're like, oh yes, tell me where it is.
Which also makes you wonder, like, why? Like, how sinister is that like you will just allow this to continue, even it's so abundantly clear and the medical literature's there of the issues, yet you will still just not allow it.
Yes.
So it's like there's something, it's not business practice, it's like sinister.
Right.
So it makes you think sometimes, are there more forces at play than what we can see in this reality? Because some of these things don't even seem logical, even for the most illogical person.
Right.
They're still not logical. So is there an influence beyond the earthly plane that is inserting itself into this reality beyond what we can really explain right now?
Is this the lizard people? Are we talking about the lizard people?
the reptilian magma dwellers. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, there does seem to be something that's like anti-human at a certain, coming from a certain angle. I don't want to say it's like, I don't want to lump a lot of people just blame the rich, right? It's like, no, that's a terrible idea. But blaming the state, I think, that's a pretty good idea. Like historically, the state causes most of this stuff. But there does seem to be this. But then you're like, oh, well, the state is made of people. It's like, okay, at some point you would imagine that humanity would sort of push back against whatever the state is trying to do. Like, what I'm saying is the inner humanity of even the administrators of the state, they would sort of give into that. But there does seem to be kind of a darker anti-human thing. With censorship specifically, like, you said this earlier with AI, like we're going into this world where we're not going to be able to tell what's true and what's not true. We're already in this situation where censorship is used to suppress narratives that don't serve the establishment and promote narratives or even fabricate narratives that do promote the establishment. That seems like it's going to get radically amplified with AI. So we're already in a bad situation that could go into a worse situation. What are your thoughts on the future? We already talked about proof of real earlier, but like, what are your thoughts on like the future of censorship? How people should be consuming content? What people should be thinking about this in general?
It's a hard question because I really don't have a great answer for it. But my thought process around it is that we're going to have something, like I noted before, that authenticates what's real and what isn't. But then when you think through that, it's like when you have that, no one's going to consume content that's not real, which is how it should be, right? We should have authenticity to what we consume, because our first point of bending our perceptual worldview, for the most part, is like content that we consume, right? Like, what are your belief patterns? What are you watching? What are you reading? And if all of a sudden everything that you're reading, you have no idea if it's real or not, because the real stuff is getting censored. So it just creates an abstraction of truth and distrust in anything that you look at, right? Like if AI reaches a point where all of a sudden you don't know what's real and what's not, then how do we cope in society?
Life becomes really meaningless at that point.
Yeah, really strange. And we've never really encountered that before. So it's going to have something where some type of technology is created where you're going to be able to scan a video and it's going to immediately be able to tell you if it's AI or not, right? Like, so there's going to be because think about it like this. It's like cybersecurity. As technology advances, cyber criminals advance. And it's this constant cat and mouse. And I kind of have a feeling that's maybe what's going to happen as some of the censorship and AI stuff plays out. It's going to be this consistent cat and mouse where you're going to have good things that are developed.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have the bad things that are developed as well. And hopefully the good stuff can outpace the bad over time.
Yeah.
But maybe it's going to be this cat and mouse game for quite some time.
Yeah. Do you, Noster has been, and I don't know a lot about Noster, but I had a guest on recently that kind of Noster pilled me, I think. I mean, I knew at a high level what it was intended to be, but he's put it in my mind that this is like if it's not the protocol, it's the latest protocol in the evolution of protocols that will become the thing that will give us freedom of speech online forever, right? And I, for the longest, thought that thing would need to be built on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the only uncensorable, unstoppable messaging system we have. So it stood to reason for me that we needed to build that messaging system or social media layer on Bitcoin. Do you have thoughts on Noster, or do you think?
So I'm not super well versed in Noster, but for my research and understanding of it, it just seems like you're allowed to say whatever you can. It's time stamped, right? It's similar to that from that perspective where it's immutable, right? And what goes out there. My question on that is, what happens if you have a bunch of disinformation that's being posted on Noster? Like, what's the situation there, right? Because it's non-censored, right? So anybody can publish it. Yeah. But and that leads to a more deep ethical question, which is, how do you determine what's disinformation and what isn't? It's a very complex topic. It's not an easy thing, right? But yeah, I don't have enough knowledge on Noster to really answer some of those questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that it solves disinformation per se, but it at least allows
you to speak
Noster users to freely express themselves without fear of censorship, which is important, but it doesn't solve all the problems. The disinformation is still a problem. And
but the ability to speak is the fundamental, thing about America when you think about it. And just worldwide, like being able to speak about what you want to speak with, right? Freedom of press, freedom of speech. So if there's a technology tool that enables that, where you can't have somebody come and yank you off their platform. And that's the other thing I think that's very crazy about today's day and age. We've had this whole new demographic of careers that are being built based on providing content on these different kinds of platforms, right? And if the platform has the power to basically say what is said and what isn't, I think there's actually a really good picture in this book Software that you have right here, where it shows Elon, Zuckerberg, and Bezos with these Pharaoh
God Kings
thing on. And in kind of a sense, like, if you control the platform and the algorithms within the platform, you have a godlike level of control over the information that's disseminated around the world. So it's a scary thought when you think about it. I'm not saying any of them have they're having sinister thing they're trying to do, but just that level of control is kind of creepy.
Putting that much power into that few hands is a recipe for disaster, typically. And that was another thing that when he nostripilled me, the ability to choose and or construct your own algorithm, that seems like something that people naturally, everyone would opt into, right? We don't all want to be one size fits all in the X algorithm. Why couldn't we all just tweak the dials on our own algorithm, right? More of this, less of that.
Sure.
Or if someone creates their own and then we just subscribe to that one, and that's a thing too. But giving more ability to curate your own algorithm seems like something that would be in universal demand.
And the platform's response to that, from my understanding, is, well, it's curated for you based on your engagement, what you click, what you like, what you retweet. In reality, I don't find that to be true, because there's stuff that's fed into my feed all the time that I have no interest in, that I've never clicked on, I've never even stopped to watch it. And I'm just flipping through and I'm like, what is this stuff? I didn't put this in here.
And I'm often saying, like, I don't like this. It shows me like Obama's post. I'm like, I'm not following this guy. I don't fucking want to see his stuff. Like, don't. No. Okay, so what are your views? We're talking about like how the social engineering is occurring worldwide. The end of that, or the aim of those agendas, let's say more broadly, it's not just one, there's many. In your view, it boils down to depopulation?
I think so. So here's a great example. We were talking about testosterone levels earlier. Lower testosterone, we're having less babies than we used to. You could argue too, the monetary system's part of that, because people can't make ends meet. It's more expensive to have children, right? So people are having less children. We know that. When you have less children, it creates a more manageable amount of people, right? You depopulate a little bit. We've also had a fundamental shift in recent years where the big thing on the news that's been talked about a lot is gender related stuff, right? And my view is do whatever you want. Don't impose it on me, right? Like if you want to do it, I can do whatever you want. Everybody's free to make their own choices, but I am also free to make my own choices, right? So, but I said, do whatever you want to do. And there's an interesting theory that I've heard about this. I think is very fascinating. And what the theory is that first you confuse gender, which is really what's kind of been playing out. Then you lose gender, and then you fuse gender with artificial intelligence. So you confuse it, you lose it, and you fuse it. And the person that came up with this concept is David Icke. I don't know if you ever followed David Icke before, but he's been studying a lot of this corruption and things, and I've been reading his books for many, many years. I think he's a fascinating guy. And so the whole concept with this, as he outlines it, is that ultimately it's to depopulate the planet and then put everybody under the control mechanism that's AI. And what I understand from his research on it, what he means by that is that when we go to Google and we type in a search query, our perception is bent and our truth is created based on the reply to what that search query is, right? Like if I go, why is the sky blue? And they come back and they go, oh, it's because the ocean's orange, or whatever the answer is, right? Then all of a sudden, over time, when you hear that enough, it becomes truth. Just like during the last couple of years and some of the craziness we went through, stand 6 feet apart, do this. And it's like, none of that was logical, but people heard it enough, they started to believe it, right? So repetition creates programming in people's minds. And so first that occurs, and then when you're querying this information, you only get the information that's provided back to you, whether it's true or not, right? So if eventually a human being is infused with artificial intelligence, meaning that like we can just think something or we can ask something and then some device is presenting that answer back to us, we are only able to get a truth based on what those algorithms present to us. Okay? And so if you have a group of people that one, have lost gender completely and then they're trying to infuse with AI, one, they're not having kids. So what does that do? Because you don't have a gender anymore. You're not gonna have kids. So you're basically losing the ability to populate. And number two, you're infused with artificial intelligence. So everything you ask, the perception of what your reality becomes narrow, and you're controllable. And so if you think about that as an agenda that maybe has been being played out for many, many, many years, it's an interesting thought exercise to go through.
Yeah, no, I've never heard of that one before. One that I'd thought about too was what we said earlier, like freedom of speech is obviously the pinnacle of the free world, right? It's I love the definition that free speech exists so that our ideas and thoughts can go to battle and die so that our bodies don't have to. You know, it's like how we resolve disputes nonviolently. And if you lose the freedom of speech, well, then you're left with just the domain of violence. So I thought that trying to confuse these very primary definitions, you're throwing a glitch or a software virus into human rationality in a way. Like if we don't have agreement on basic terms, well, then we can't have fruitful discourse at all, right? Like freedom of speech is buggy at that point. And so that like kind of shifts the locus of power more into the physical, the physical domain, of which the state is obviously at the pinnacle of, right, as the monopoly of violence. So getting people divided amongst themselves by confusing basic definitions is kind of like a divide and conquer / power shift strategy by the state to just not, again, you don't want a unified populace, you don't want them thinking critically, and you don't want them armed. Well, then start confusing the definitions. Like, that's a good start, right?
For sure.
And again, people say, oh, that's conspiracy theory. This is a genuine cultural movement, blah, blah, blah. It's like bullshit. It's state sponsored. Like the funding you can even trace a lot of it, right? Through the universities and critical race theory, all this shit is just complete state funded nonsense. It's not, there's nothing organic about it. So yeah, we're talking about wokeism, negatively about wokeism early on was like triggering a lot of people. A lot of even Bitcoiners like, why are you even talking about this stuff? But it's like, you need to dig deeper. Like the game,
there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah. It's not even 3D chess. It's like 5D chess. And you just got to keep digging.
And there's things that have been played out for so many years. Like here's an interesting data point. So this just kind of shows an example of when there's a agenda that's being played out by somebody who has a very vested interest in it. Sometimes these families will play things out many years in advance. And I think a interesting example of this from my research is that the government many years ago, before it was common for women to really be integrated into the workforce, they did a fundamental change where they created this movement. And my understanding from this is, from my research, it's more created by the Rockefeller Foundation, who influenced this movement. But it was the women's rights movement, okay? And basically, in creating a way for women to get excited about wanting to enter the workforce, right? And when you really trace it back, my research shows that the reason there's two main reasons it was happening. One is because they're really taxing half the society, right? Minimum tax. Like, how do we earn some more tax revenue?
Yeah.
Well, let's create a movement and get women into the workplace. Now everyone's getting taxed, right? And that creates this whole new paradigm.
They did the same thing with cigarettes, by the way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Getting women smoking,
And then the other thing that I think is even more important than that, even though that's a very pivotal part of it, is that when the woman goes to work, the child, it disrupts the family unit when you think about it, right?
Straight into a state-sponsored school.
State-sponsored school, then the after-school programs. And what is a state-sponsored school? It's an indoctrination program.
Yeah.
And then what is it indoctrinated to do? Sit in a desk for 8 hours a day. Don't move. What's a big corporation? Sit at a desk 8 hours a day. Don't move. I mean, these are very long-term agendas that are being played out, right? Yeah. And so it disrupts the family unit. It creates the tax incentive that we talked about. So these are very, very big things that on the face and the surface of it look like this exciting movement, but there's a much more sinister agenda, I think, behind it that was playing out.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And that's the right framing, in my opinion. Dude, I could talk to you all day. This has been a lot of fun. Been all over the place, but really enjoyed it. I know you've got a plane to catch. So one last question, if you would. What does the future hold for you? Where are you? Like, you've had an interesting path up until this point. Sounds like you've really followed your heart and followed your intuition, and that's led you some good places. What's next for you? Like, where do you go from here?
Yeah, so I mean, long term, I'm really interested in what I do now. I'm going to continue to build out what we do. I love educating on Bitcoin and digital assets and being able to help people get up the learning curve on that, because my experience with it is I made mistakes early on, and I don't want other people to make the same mistakes I made. And so if you can take that knowledge and then expand it to people, that's a big goal of mine. So help people get up the learning curve on Bitcoin and really help with that. Also, what we do with Off the Chain from an asset management perspective, I love what we do. I love our partners and investors that we have. I love creating like unique investment products in the space that gives people exposure, because one of the things that we do that I think is very different from a normal asset manager is you're not just putting your money in something and then getting like a quarterly statement, right? When you do with what we do and you're investing with us, what you're really getting access to is a very interesting community of knowledgeable people in the space. Because not only are you investing with us, but like we do like every month or every other month, like educational seminars with all of our clients where we're like walking them through the markets, helping them understand the Bitcoin and monetary policy, helping them understand what's changing from a political and regulatory standpoint. So it's like this awesome investment group where it's much more than just an investment. It's like a huge knowledge base. And it's so cool to see people that invest with us that maybe they had no exposure to the space before. Like we're their first entry point into digital assets. And then after 6 months of listening on our calls and learning, they're buying Bitcoin, they're buying this and that, they're studying Austrian economics, they're riding the Bitcoin standard. They're like, it's this expansion of consciousness in the digital asset space. And to me, that's really rewarding to be able to contribute and provide value there. And then over time, I would love to continue to help build things on a Bitcoin denominated standard, like new industries, like take an existing industry and put it on a Bitcoin standard, right? Like I could take a record label, put it on the Bitcoin standard, like just interesting things like that. And going back to my hobbies and passions around ancient civilization and technology that we talked about before, years into the future, after I kind of lived through this chapter of my life, one thing I would love to do is have like a research group where I'm able to bring in and work with really brilliant people around science and technology and ancient civilizations and collectively work with them to kind of study these things that I've always been fascinated with, like interstellar travel, teleportation, Stargate, like all these different things, and how that ties back into ancient civilizations, and have that, maybe it's in the format of a charitable foundation or something, where we have people where I'm kind of going and the contributions are helping us fund this research, and we go learn about this fringe science and interesting stuff that connects maybe the astral world to our reality as we uncover more about that over time. But that's a big passion of mine long term.
That is super cool. Wow. I would love to read the research reports coming out of there. Dude, thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any closing words of wisdom for the audience? And could you also let them know where to find you on the internet?
Yeah, of course. So to find me, my X account or Twitter account is just Brian Dixon 06. And Off the Chain Capital is the company website. It's offthechain.capital. So please feel free to go check that out. We actually offer a lot of Bitcoin educational resources on there too. The best knowledge that we've attained in Bitcoin through like talks and books and things we publish there. And we also publish on a monthly basis our charts that we use as a company to help us determine if Bitcoin's fairly valued, overvalued, or undervalued. So we update those on a monthly basis, and people can check out there to kind of see where we think Bitcoin's standing based on these charts. And I guess my closing words would be, if you haven't spent the time to understand what Bitcoin is and how powerful it is, give yourself a couple months of doing it. I'm super passionate about it because it's been so influential in my life, and it's creating such a fundamental shift in our reality. And I read some interesting research the other day that claimed that about 500,000 people in the world will ever own one Bitcoin. And 10,000 or less will ever own two or more, because of how quickly it's going to expand in price, right?
Wow.
And so there's only a couple 100 million people around the world today operating with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
But imagine when there's 1 billion people and 2 billion and 3 billion. It's going to go from, in the early days when a lot of people thought it was worthless, to priceless.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's an adoption curve and a fundamental shift in how our whole world operates. And if you can spend the time now to educate yourself on it, to get an understanding and be a part of that, not only will it revitalize, I think, the whole way you look at the world, because over time, that's usually what happens to people. They start questioning all these things, and it creates this awakening. But hopefully you can participate that and create a store of value for yourself long-term along the way.
I think those are wonderful words of wisdom.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks for doing this.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.